Hi guys. Tonight we settle down near the flickering heart of a native encampment, and instead of polished granite countertops or humming refrigerators, you find yourself surrounded by firelight and the aroma of wood smoke. Sparks rise into the night sky as if trying to imitate the stars, and every sense you have is invited to sit a little closer. This is your kitchen tonight, and it is as old as humanity itself. A ring of stones, a bundle of sticks, a few glowing coals, and suddenly survival is transformed into nourishment. You lean in, feeling the dry heat on your cheeks, and wonder how people could ever have trusted such simple forces to provide for whole families. You probably wouldn't survive this without guidance, at least not for long, but don't worry, there are teachers here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this somewhere far away, post your location and your local time in the comments. I love to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, and let's begin. The fire itself is more than just warmth. It is the centerpiece of the evening meal. Flames dance around heavy logs, creating a heat that cooks evenly without the control knobs you're used to. You see women laying strips of venison directly across low-burning embers, the fat dripping and hissing with tiny flares of orange. Children hover close, giggling as they are shooed away, while elders stir pots suspended by wooden tripods. A mainstream historical fact worth noting here is that nearly every native community, from the Iroquois in the northeast to the Navajo in the southwest, considered fire a sacred gift as well as a tool. The hearth was both altar and kitchen. Imagine the smells, a savory mix of meat, roasted maize, and pungent smoke that lingers in hair and clothes for days. The crackle of sap pockets bursting inside the wood keeps time, like a drummer marking the rhythm of domestic life. Without ovens, the flames themselves had to be read like an ancient book, embers for steady heat, flames for quick searing, ashes for gentle roasting. You crouch low and notice how they arrange the wood not randomly, but with practiced care. Hardwoods that burn long on one side, softer branches for fast sparks on the other. One quirky tidbit that often surprises modern cooks is that ashes weren't simply brushed aside. They were sometimes used directly in cooking. Dough for bread could be placed under a light blanket of cooled ash, baking slowly until the crust turned crisp. It might sound unappetizing at first, but it left a subtle, earthy taste that people grew to love. Can you picture reaching into the warm earth and pulling out a loaf kissed by smoke and soot? The fire wasn't only about feeding stomachs. It created a gathering place, a magnetic circle where stories were exchanged and songs lifted. Every meal prepared here carried echoes of teaching when to hunt, how to recognize safe plants, what mistakes to avoid. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether fire use for cooking originated as a cultural innovation passed deliberately across generations, or whether it emerged independently in many places at once, each community discovering its secret through trial and error. Either way, standing here, you sense the miracle in its simplicity. Your hands feel dry from the heat, your face warm, but your back is still chilled by the evening air. You shuffle closer, imagining how essential this was in winter. The firelight flickers across faces that lean in expectantly as smoke curls upward, carrying with it not just the smell of roasting game but also the collective memory of centuries. In the glow, you realize that the first kitchen you ever knew was not tiled or enclosed but wide open under the stars, with a fire at its center and people bound by necessity, flavor, and community. You wake to the quiet scrape of stone against stone, a hollow clink that echoes like distant bells. In the dim pre-dawn glow, you realize the fire has burned low, but someone is already busy heating rocks until they glow faintly red. This is the moment when stone becomes a pot. Without metal pans, people had to imagine containers differently, and their solution feels ingenious. Water is poured into a hide bag or a wooden trough, and into it go the hot stones, hissing like angry serpents. Steam curls upward, and suddenly you're boiling food without a kettle. A mainstream historical fact here is that archaeologists have uncovered countless cracked and blackened rocks at ancient campsites across North America, clear evidence of this method. They're sometimes called boiling stones, and they bear witness to thousands of years of dinners made without iron. Imagine the patience it took, moving one heated stone at a time with sticks or tongs made of antler, dropping it into liquid, then fishing it back out when it cooled. You can almost hear the hiss and taste the mineral tang that those stones must have lent to every broth. You notice the hides used for holding the liquid, carefully stitched and coated with rendered fat to keep them waterproof. The sight alone challenges your modern sense of what cookware should be. No pots, no pans, just clever use of what nature offered. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some tribes were known to flavor the stones themselves. They might rub herbs or sap onto the rocks before plunging them in, a primitive but surprisingly effective way of infusing extra taste into the bubbling soup. Picture the crackle of resin meeting boiling water, releasing a woodsy sweetness into the broth. Scholars still argue whether this stone boiling technique spread widely through trade and cultural exchange, or if it emerged independently in multiple places, as people everywhere confronted the same challenge of cooking without metal. The debate lingers in academic journals, but you, crouched here in the half-light, simply marvel at how universal human creativity can be when survival is at stake. The food itself might be maize, gruel, venison stew, or fish soup, depending on the region and season. Whatever it is, the boiling process makes it safer and easier to digest. Steam fills your lungs, warming you from the inside before you even eat. Children peer into the steaming hides with wide eyes, waiting for the signal to dip their carved wooden spoons. Elders sit patiently, knowing that nothing good comes quickly. There's something deeply soothing about the rhythm of it all. Heating, dropping, steaming, scooping, repeating. No timers, no dials, just listening to the water and watching the steam. The stones cool, they're reheated, and the cycle continues until the meal is done. You lean closer, imagining yourself trying it, your clumsy hands fumbling with hot rocks, the hide sloshing dangerously. But here, among practiced cooks, it looks almost effortless. And when finally the food is ready, bowls are filled, laughter breaks out, and steam drifts into the crisp air, you realize that this primitive kitchen is more sophisticated than it seems. It doesn't just feed the body, it trains patience, ingenuity, and community. The fire from last night has shifted into a new role this morning, and the stones themselves have become silent chefs, coaxing flavor from raw ingredients in a dance as old as time. The fire is glowing steadily again, and now you notice another marvel taking shape a few paces away. A group of people are scooping earth with wooden shovels and antler tools, carving out a wide, shallow pit. They line the bottom with stones and clay, then set a fire inside until everything is blistering hot. Once the flames die down, food is lowered into the hollow wrapped in leaves, nestled against the heated rocks, and then covered with soil. This is the clay-lined earth oven, a method that turns the very ground beneath you into a slow-cooking chamber. It's widely accepted that earth ovens were used across countless native communities, from the arid deserts of the southwest to the forested northeast. Archaeologists have uncovered dark, charcoal-filled pits with layers of burned stone that testify to centuries of this practice. The evidence isn't subtle. Entire landscapes are dotted with these remnants, often mistaken for simple fire scars until closer study reveals their culinary purpose. Curiously enough, some of these pits were reused again and again in the same location, becoming a kind of ancestral kitchen. Each time the earth was disturbed and the pit rebuilt, it tied families to place, a reminder that meals were not just about filling bellies but about maintaining bonds with land and kin. Picture returning to the same sunken hearth your grandparents once stood beside, knowing the soil itself carried the memory of feasts long past. Experts continue to puzzle over whether clay-lined ovens originated as a purely functional solution, or whether they carried ceremonial significance as well. Some scholars argue that these pits doubled as ritual spaces, with the act of burying food symbolizing rebirth, patience, or gratitude. Others see them simply as efficient tools, perfected through trial and error. The truth may lie somewhere in between, and perhaps even varied among tribes. You glance at the pit before you and wonder, were they cooking dinner, or were they quietly praying too? As the pit is prepared, the scent of damp earth mingles with wood smoke, and you notice bundles of corn, squash, and fish wrapped tightly in husks and leaves. The packages are lowered carefully into the hot stones. Then comes the covering layers of clay, dirt, and more leaves sealing the heat in. The surface looks almost untouched by human hands. Once the final layer of soil is patted smooth, now the waiting begins. Hours pass before the earth oven yields its treasure, but when it does, the reward is extraordinary. Meat that falls from the bone, corn that bursts with smoky sweetness, and vegetables infused with a rich earthiness. The method itself has a kind of alchemy. Heat is trapped, steam circulates, and flavors mingle in ways an open flame never allows. You kneel near the mound, running your hand across the warm dirt, feeling the hidden energy still radiating from below. A part of you marvels at the patience required. There's no rushing this process, no peeking every few minutes. The cooks trust the earth itself to hold and transform the meal. When the mound is finally opened, it feels like unearthing buried treasure. Steam rises in thick white clouds, carrying with it aromas that make your stomach ache with hunger. The food is lifted out, glistening with juices, leaves charred at the edges but fragrant. A bite of venison, roasted underground for half a day, melts on the tongue with an intensity of flavor no quick pan sear could ever match. You close your eyes and imagine chewing slowly, savoring the smoke, the soil, and the patience embedded in every mouthful. This earth oven is more than clever engineering. It's a living metaphor for survival and celebration. It brings people together in the work of digging, tending, waiting, and finally sharing. Children scamper around the mound, eager for the moment of unveiling, while elders smile knowingly, remembering countless similar meals from decades past. The act of uncovering the food becomes a communal event, almost theatrical, as if nature herself had been keeping the feast warm until everyone was ready. What strikes you is how these techniques turn apparent limitations into abundance. Without pots, ovens, or timers, entire communities still thrived. They discovered that earth could be kiln, pot, and oven all in one. The land provided not only the ingredients but also the very tool to transform them. It makes you wonder how many solutions to your own modern problems might be lying right beneath your feet, waiting only for imagination to uncover them. Later, as the night deepens and plates are licked clean, the pit is allowed to cool. Tomorrow, it might be rebuilt in the same spot or abandoned to return to the forest floor. But for tonight, it has served as the center of both nourishment and memory. You sit back, your belly warm, your senses filled, and realize that you've just eaten from the earth itself, literally. The kitchen here has no walls, no roof, no boundaries, only fire, stone, clay, and time. The embers are low now, glowing faintly beneath a scattering of ash, and you watch as someone rakes them into a smooth bed. A hush falls across the camp, as ears catch the faint crackle of wood breaking down into pure heat. Then, with a practiced motion, a hand tosses a few husked cobs of corn directly into the ash. There's no pot, no foil wrapping, just kernels sizzling in their leafy armor, the fire itself acting as stove and seasoning. This is the simplest of meals, yet in its simplicity lies genius. Archaeological findings confirm that maize was central to the diets of countless native communities for centuries, long before European contact. Charred cobs have been found at dig sites dating back thousands of years, silent evidence of corn, roasted right in the ashes, much like you're seeing now. It wasn't merely food, it was sustenance, identity, and in many tribes, a gift of divine origin. To roast corn like this is to take part in a ritual that connects body and spirit with field and flame. You might be amused to learn that sometimes kernels roasted so fiercely in the embers that they popped, scattering like tiny fireworks into the night. Imagine children chasing after popped corn, giggling as they caught the fluffy white treats. Yes, popcorn existed here long before movie theaters and microwaves, born from a campfire's playful heat. That image alone makes you smile in the smoky glow. Some anthropologists maintain that corn roasting was primarily a practical solution for quick meals, while others suggest it carried symbolic meaning tied to ceremonies celebrating harvest and fertility. The academic debate continues because what looks to you like a snack might, to the people who first practiced it, have been much more layered. Was it merely food, or was it Thanksgiving folded into every bite? The husks themselves add to the magic. Left on, they protect the kernels from burning too quickly, while infusing the corn with a grassy sweetness. Peeled back, they serve as natural handles, allowing you to eat directly without plates or cutlery. Your fingers would blacken, your face would glow in the firelight, and your hunger would vanish in a few delicious bites. Close your eyes and imagine that crunch, smoky, juicy, a little charred at the edges but deeply satisfying. In some camps, women smeared a thin layer of animal fat or bear grease on the cobs before roasting, ensuring the kernels stayed moist and adding extra richness. The smell of sizzling fat hitting hot ash lingers in your mind, savory and irresistible. If salt was available through trade, it was sprinkled sparingly, elevating the corn into something transcendent. Otherwise, herbs gathered nearby provided seasoning, each bite carrying hints of sage, wild onion, or mint. You notice how communal the act island. Corn roasting isn't about solitary chefs laboring behind closed doors. It's about family gathered around flames, waiting for the right moment when the cobs are lifted out and passed hand to hand. The firelight reflects in their eyes as they laugh, tease, and share stories while chewing. Each roasted ear is eaten quickly, but the memory of that gathering lingers far longer. Corn wasn't always eaten whole like this, of course. You recall the grinding stones from earlier, the gruel simmering in hide bags. But roasting in ash was immediate, joyful, and efficient. It required no elaborate setup, no long wait, just a good fire and an empty stomach. For nomadic groups or during travel, it was the perfect way to transform a raw cob into fuel for the body in minutes. There's something about the crackle and hiss of corn roasting that feels eternal, as though this sound has accompanied human existence for as long as flames have. It makes you wonder, in your modern kitchen, how often do you hear your food talking back? Here, every hiss is a whisper, every pop a cheer, every crackle a reminder that you're alive, present, and nourished. The ashes themselves, once cooled, are carefully sifted. Any kernels left behind are rescued, nothing wasted. In lean times, even the husks might be boiled for flavoring, their essence steeped into soups. These details remind you that survival meant honoring every gift from the field. Nothing was trivial, and nothing was thrown away without purpose. Later, when the embers fade and bellies are full, people lie back, the sweet taste of roasted maize still on their tongues. The stars wheel overhead, the fire sighs, and you realize you've just tasted the same food that sustained countless generations through centuries of struggle and joy. Roasted corn on the coals, so simple, so profound, carries within it both survival and celebration. The night has deepened, the stars gleam in their silent watch, and now you turn your gaze toward a wooden frame set near the edge of the camp. Long poles lean against each other in a lattice, forming a rack that hovers just above a smouldering fire. Draped across it are fillets of salmon, their pink flesh glowing faintly in the firelight, the air already heavy with a sweet, oily fragrance. This is smoking, one of the oldest and most effective techniques for preserving food, and it transforms fish into sustenance that can last for weeks, even months. Archaeological sites along river valleys and coastlines make it plain that fish smoking was not just a luxury but a lifeline. Layers of charcoal, bone, and wooden structures reveal a history of smokehouses and open racks stretching back thousands of years. You can almost see it, Countless generations standing right here, tending fires that burned low and steady, ensuring their families would not go hungry when rivers froze or when journeys stretched long. Curiously enough, the wood chosen for smoking mattered as much as the fish itself. Alder, willow, or applewood were preferred in some regions, each imparting a unique flavor. Families became known for the particular signature smoke of their fish, a detail that sounds like gourmet branding, but was really just practical tradition. Imagine being able to recognize where a piece of salmon came from simply by the faint aroma of the wood that flavored it. There is ongoing debate in academic circles about whether smoking techniques spread across the continent by trade networks or developed independently in regions blessed with abundant fish. Some researchers argue that similarities in rack design and fire tending hint at shared knowledge passed from tribe to tribe. Others insist that necessity breeds parallel invention, that people, faced with the same challenge of keeping fish edible, naturally discovered similar solutions. Standing here, you realize that whatever the path, the wisdom was universal. The process itself is slow, deliberate, and oddly soothing. Fires are kept small, producing more smoke than flame, and the fish are laid carefully across the racks, angled so that smoke curls evenly around them. You see the oil glisten, dripping in tiny droplets that hiss when they strike the coals. The smell is intoxicating, a blend of sea salt tang, sweet wood, and rich fat that makes your stomach churn with hunger. Yet no one rushes. This is a ritual of patience, requiring hours, sometimes days, before the fish is properly cured. Children play nearby, accustomed to the scent that will cling to their hair and clothes for weeks. For them, smoke is not an inconvenience, but the perfume of survival. Elders sit close, eyes half shut, as though remembering other fires, other racks, other winters when smoked salmon kept hunger at bay. A story might be told, voices low and steady, so that the rhythm of memory merges with the rhythm of smoke curling upward. One little-known practice was to rub the fish with herbs or salt, when available, before placing it on the racks. This not only flavored the meat, but also helped keep insects away during the long drying process. In coastal communities, seaweed was sometimes used as a protective layer, lending a briny undertone to the final taste. You imagine biting into such fish, smoky, chewy, salty, with a whisper of the ocean still intact. As you watch, the racks become more than just tools. They are symbols of foresight, a way of thinking beyond the immediate meal. Here, food is not consumed as quickly as possible but carefully preserved so that tomorrow, next week, or next season will not bring despair. Smoking is a conversation between present and future, between hunger now and hunger yet to come. You lean back and consider how, in your world, refrigeration has erased this daily awareness of scarcity. But here, the act of smoking fish is also the act of imagining a cold January night when rivers are locked in ice. It is an act of hope, a promise made by today's labor to tomorrow's survival. The fire continues its gentle sigh, smoke drifting lazily into the star-strewn sky. When the fish are finally ready, they are leathery but rich, holding within them both nourishment and memory. Stored carefully in packs of bark or hide, they will travel far across forests, rivers, mountains, feeding hunters, traders, and children alike. Each bite is more than just food. It is continuity, proof that people knew how to bend nature to sustain life. And as the rack creaks in the night breeze, with salmon slowly darkening in the smoke, you feel the immense weight of knowledge pass silently through generations. The method remains nearly unchanged because it does not need improvement. Fire, wood, fish, time, that is all. You smile to yourself, realizing that the simplicity of it is what makes it perfect. The fire crackles again, but this time you notice something different. Instead of pits in the earth or racks of fish, a group gathers with slender willow sticks freshly cut from the riverbank. The branches are peeled of bark, sharpened at one end, and soon skewers of meat are threaded along them. Rabbit, perhaps, or small birds, even strips of venison. The people settle near the fire, and begin to rotate their skewers slowly, patiently, as though the meal were a dance between flame and flesh. It's widely recognized among historians that roasting food on sticks is one of the earliest and most universal cooking techniques. Evidence of charred bones and skewered remains has been found across the Americas, suggesting that long before kettles or pots, people were content to trust a branch and a steady hand. The method endures in every culture today, from campfire hot dogs to shish kebabs. But here, in this circle, you see it in its most essential form. An odd but effective trick sometimes used was to soak the willow sticks in water before threading the meat. The moisture kept the wood from catching fire too quickly and lent a faintly sweet flavor to the food. You can imagine the hiss as juices drip into the coals, a sizzling whisper that makes mouths water all around the fire. Researchers remain divided on whether skewering like this was strictly utilitarian done when nothing else was available, or whether it carried symbolic resonance, perhaps in hunting rituals or teaching children the patience of tending flame. Some argue that the deliberate slowness of turning a skewer was itself a form of discipline, a training in awareness and attentiveness. Others see no deeper meaning, only the practical act of making dinner. Watching now, you suspect it may have been both. The meat cooks unevenly if you're careless, but these hands are not careless. Each skewer is rotated with a rhythm born of repetition, ensuring a crisp outer layer while the inside remains tender. You catch the smell, smoky, savory, laced with hints of willow. Children squirm with hunger, begging for a bite before the meat is ready, and the older ones laugh, remembering when they did the same. This isn't just cooking, it's apprenticeship by appetite. Sometimes, herbs are pressed into the meat before skewering. Wild onions, garlic, or sage leaves are tucked between chunks, releasing their oils as the heat draws them out. The result is a simple but layered flavor, earthy and fragrant. If fat is available, it's brushed onto the skewers with bunches of grass or feathers, sizzling on contact and coating the food in richness. You lean closer, imagining the first bite hot enough to sting your tongue, smoky enough to linger on your breath, juicy enough to make you lick your fingers in the firelight. The skewers themselves become teaching tools. Younger children are allowed to roast smaller morsels, their concentration tested by the delicate balance of keeping food above the heat but not in the flames. Elders watch with amusement, stepping in only if disaster looms. In this way, the art of fire tending passes seamlessly between generations, not through lectures but through play and hunger. Curiously, roasting on sticks also made food more portable. Hunters could cook game immediately after a kill, far from camp, without needing elaborate setups. They could roast what they needed, eat quickly, and move on, leaving little behind but bones and embers. For nomadic groups, this meant survival was never tethered to a single place. Fire and a branch could turn any patch of wilderness into a kitchen. The glow of the fire reflects in every eye as skewers are lifted, meat steaming in the cold night air. A hush falls as the first bites are taken, then murmurs of satisfaction ripple around the circle. It's a sound you know well, a universal sigh that says, "This is good, this is enough." You chew along with them in imagination, warmed by the flavor as much as by the fire. In this moment, you realize how little separates ancient camps from your own modern experiences. Haven't you leaned over a fire, impatient for food to cook, laughing with friends as sparks fly into the sky? The continuity stretches across time, linking your hands with theirs. What you call camping, they called life. And though the stakes were higher here, true survival, not leisure, the joy of food roasted on fire remains unchanged. When the last bones are discarded and the fire burns low, the smell of roasted meat lingers in your hair and clothes. It will follow you into dreams, a reminder that with nothing more than a willow branch and a flame, people have always known how to turn hunger into comfort. The simplicity humbles you, and the taste, imagined though it is, stays with you long after the last ember fades. Morning light creeps through the trees, painting the camp in soft gold. The fire has been rekindled, and this time you notice a woman carefully arranging thin sheets of birch bark into a shallow bowl shape. To your surprise, she fills it with water drawn from the stream and drops in a handful of dried meat and roots. You expect the bark to ignite, but it doesn't. The water shields it from burning. Soon, a man places glowing stones into the vessel with a carved fork of green wood, and the liquid begins to bubble. Birch bark, fragile as it looks, has become a pot. It's widely accepted among archaeologists that birch bark vessels were common across the northern woodlands, prized not only for carrying but also for cooking. Their waterproof quality, enhanced with resin or fat, made them surprisingly durable. In fact, entire sets of bark containers have been recovered from burial sites, a testament to how essential they were to daily life. Imagine a kitchen stocked not with steel or ceramic, but with the very bark of trees peeled carefully by skilled hands. One little-known practice was to decorate these bark vessels with patterns scratched into the surface before use. The designs weren't merely ornamental, they sometimes indicated the owner's family or carried protective symbols. Picture boiling your stew inside a vessel lined with markings of deer, rivers, or stars, each symbol a whispered reminder of the world outside the campfire. Some anthropologists suggest that bark cooking was mostly utilitarian, a clever use of available resources. Others argue it carried deeper meaning, connecting people with the living trees that gave them both material and sustenance. The academic conversation hasn't reached agreement. Was the birch bark pot just a tool, or was it a partner in the sacred act of nourishment? You sit cross-legged, listening to the bubbling water, and sense the answer might depend on who you ask and when. The stones are cycled in and out with practiced care. Each hisses violently as it hits the water, steam rising in fragrant bursts. Bubbles roll up from the bottom, turning the once still liquid into a lively stew. Roots soften, meat loosens, and herbs release their fragrance. Your nostrils flare with the earthy scent, a blend of wood smoke, sweet birch, and savory broth. It's remarkable how quickly your hunger sharpens just from watching. Children peer in, wide-eyed, marveling at the trick of fire made tame inside tree bark. They laugh as the steam fogs their faces, then squeal when an elder plops in another red-hot stone. The hiss and crack remind you of an orchestra's cymbal, a sudden note of drama in the quiet morning. Every person here seems to know their role. One tends the fire, another cycles the stones, another watches the pot so it doesn't tip. Cooking, you realize, is not solitary but communal. You might be amused to learn that some groups flavored the stones themselves before dropping them in. Smeared with pine resin or wrapped in aromatic leaves, they infused the stew with a forest-like fragrance. The idea of seasoning through hot rock seems almost whimsical, but it worked. Imagine sipping broth laced faintly with pine, wild onion, and smoke simple, yet rich with place. The birch bark vessel, though temporary, reflects a different philosophy of tools. Modern cookware is designed to last for years, passed from one household to another. These bark bowls, by contrast, were created to serve for a season or a journey, then return to the earth. Their impermanence did not make them less valuable. Instead, it tied them to cycles of growth and renewal. A tree might live on as both shade and stew pot, offering its bark before continuing to thrive. Experts continue to puzzle over whether bark cooking was the invention of a single region or whether it appeared spontaneously wherever birch trees thrived. The evidence is scattered but persuasive. Similar vessels have been found from the Great Lakes to the Canadian North, each adapted to local needs. Standing here, you realize the method's elegance lies in its simplicity. If you have bark, fire, water, and stone, you have a kitchen. The stew is finally ladled out with carved wooden spoons. It's hot enough to make you blow across the surface before daring a sip. The taste is humble, meat softened to tenderness, roots carrying the flavor of the earth, herbs brightening the broth. Yet the birch bark adds something intangible, a faint sweetness in the steam that makes the dish feel like more than survival. It feels like a meal born from conversation with the forest itself. When the pot is empty, the bark will likely be set aside, maybe dried for later reuse, maybe discarded into the fire. Either way, nothing is wasted. The tree continues to grow, and the people continue to eat. You sit back, warming your hands against the embers, realizing that a simple sheet of bark has done the impossible. It has held fire in its heart without being consumed. And with it, people have cooked not only food but also stories, traditions, and hope. The day grows warmer, and laughter ripples through the camp as a group of children chase one another with hollowed gourds clutched in their hands. You assume they are toys until you notice the adults carving into a large pumpkin, carefully scooping out seeds and fibers. Soon, the hollow shell is set directly among glowing coals, filled with a mixture of beans, corn, and strips of venison. A lid of clay seals the top. Slowly, the gourd itself becomes a cooking pot, its skin blackening, its flesh softening, while the stew inside simmers. It is well documented that many native groups used gourds and pumpkins not only as food but as containers and vessels. Their hard rinds made them excellent substitutes for pottery in communities that moved frequently or had limited access to clay. Travelers and explorers noted with fascination how a pumpkin could serve double duty, first as a vessel to cook in, then as part of the meal itself. Few modern kitchens can boast such efficiency. One unusual practice was to line the inside of the gourd with leaves before filling it. This prevented burning and added extra aroma. Imagine pulling away charred husks of pumpkin to reveal beans infused with the scent of wild mint or sage. The idea that cookware could also flavor the dish is something your stainless steel pots could never match. Some ethnographers point out that the use of pumpkins and gourds may have had ceremonial undertones. Certain tribes considered them gifts from the spirits of the earth, symbols of fertility and plenty. Others insist that practicality was the only guide. Pumpkins were plentiful, durable, and naturally suited for the task. Scholars have yet to settle this question, but as you watch the gourd bubble gently in the coals, you suspect the truth might be both. After all, when a tool feeds you and your family, is it not sacred by default? The cooking process unfolds slowly. The pumpkin's skin hardens, forming a natural shell that traps steam inside. The mixture of beans and venison softens, the corn releases sweetness, and the pumpkin flesh itself begins to melt into the stew. By the time the lid is cracked open, the interior has transformed into a fragrant blend of earth and fire. Steam curls upward, carrying notes of sweetness and smoke, and you can almost taste the rich, thick broth coating your tongue. Children are given the roasted seeds first, crisped in the fire until nutty and fragrant. They chew happily, cracking shells between their teeth, while elders ladle portions of stew from the pumpkin's belly. Each spoonful is a surprise, the beans hearty, the corn chewy, the meat tender, and the pumpkin itself soft and sweet. It's a layered dish that feels almost modern in its complexity, though born entirely of ancient improvisation. You might smile to learn that some pumpkins were roasted whole with honey or maple syrup, creating a dessert that must have tasted like autumn itself. Sweet, smoky, and golden, it would have been served at feasts, a rare indulgence in a life often defined by necessity. To think that such a treat was possible without sugar mills or bakeries shows the creativity embedded in every meal. The pumpkin pot, once emptied, might be tossed into the fire to burn away, or cut up so the softened flesh could be eaten completely. Nothing is wasted. The seeds could be stored for planting, ensuring that next year's meals would sprout from this year's vessel. The cycle is complete. Food that feeds you also teaches you how to feed yourself tomorrow. Some researchers remain uncertain whether pumpkin cookery developed in one cultural hub and spread outward, or whether communities across the continent independently discovered its usefulness. Archaeological evidence suggests both may be true, with variations found in widely separated regions. To you, sitting near the coals, it hardly matters. What matters is the ingenuity in recognizing potential where others might see only a vegetable. The sound of the gourd crackling in the embers is oddly soothing, like a log splitting in a fireplace. You lean closer, watching the stew thicken, and wonder at how this method marries convenience and taste. No separate pot to carry, no cleanup needed, just a pumpkin, a fire, and imagination. It's a kind of sustainability modern society often preaches but rarely practices. When the meal is over, the camp feels satisfied in a way beyond fullness. Bellies are warm, laughter is easy, and the scent of roasted pumpkin clings to the air. You rest your chin in your hand, thinking how astonishing it is that survival can be so inventive, so flavorful, so deeply tied to the gifts of the land. A pumpkin is no longer just food, it is kitchen, pot and dish all at once, a reminder that necessity and creativity walk hand in hand. Later in the day, when the smoke of breakfast has drifted away, and the camp settles into its rhythm, you hear the steady thunk of wooden pestles striking against hollowed logs. A group of women crouches in a circle, rhythmically pounding something that looks like pale brown nuts. You lean closer and realize they are acorns, their shells cracked, their bitter flesh ground into powder. At first, you wrinkle your nose. Everyone knows acorns are harsh and tannic, hardly edible. But here, in practiced hands, they are transformed into nourishment. Archaeologists have long noted that acorns were a staple in many native communities, particularly in oak-rich regions of California and the East. Charred remains of acorn shells, along with grinding stones worn smooth, speak to centuries of reliance on what others might dismiss as inedible. In fact, some historians argue that without acorns, entire populations could not have thrived in regions where game was scarce or unpredictable. You might be surprised to learn how carefully acorns had to be treated. Once shelled and ground, the meal was leached with water to wash away the bitterness of tannins. This was done in ingenious ways, sometimes by placing the flour in woven baskets submerged in running streams, other times by pouring water repeatedly over the mash in shallow pits lined with leaves. It might take hours, even days, but patience rewarded them with a mild, nutty flour. Experts still debate whether acorn preparation was primarily driven by necessity, using whatever was abundant, or whether it became a cultural preference over time. Some anthropologists argue that the elaborate process of leaching, grinding, and cooking suggests more than desperation. It implies mastery, the kind that transforms hardship into tradition. Perhaps acorns weren't just fallback food, perhaps they were celebrated in their own right. Once the flour was ready, it could be stirred into mush, baked into flat cakes, or added to soups. Imagine dipping a wooden spoon into a steaming bowl of acorn porridge, its flavor earthy and subtle, filling your belly with warmth on a cold morning. It might not dazzle the tongue, but it would keep you alive and strong. And in a world where survival mattered more than indulgence, that was richness enough. There's a peculiar but fascinating detail. Sometimes ash from the fire was sprinkled into the acorn mash. The alkali neutralized bitterness more quickly, a trick both chemical and culinary. To modern ears, it sounds strange adding ashes to food, but it reveals an intuitive grasp of chemistry, long before such things were written in books. Children helped too, cracking shells and carrying baskets of water. It wasn't busy work, it was education. Each small hand learning to sort good nuts from bad, each ear absorbing the rhythm of pestles pounding into meal. This wasn't merely food preparation, it was apprenticeship in survival, passed on without a single lecture. You can almost feel the textures yourself, the rough shell fragments under your fingers, the cool splash of water in the leaching pit, the fine powder of flour clinging to your skin. The camp fills with smells woody, earthy, smoky as the process continues. The sound of pounding becomes a kind of drumbeat, steady and hypnotic, carrying across the forest like a heartbeat of daily life. When the porridge is finally ready, it is served in bark bowls, steaming and plain, yet sometimes berries or honey were stirred in, elevating it into a sweet treat. Children's faces light up as the tartness of berries cuts through the blandness, while elders smile knowingly at the indulgence. You realize that even the humblest ingredients could be coaxed into delight with a little creativity. Some communities stored acorns in massive granaries, hollowed logs, or woven silos raised off the ground. These caches ensured survival through winter, when hunting grew difficult and snow blanketed the land. Imagine looking at a towering store of nuts and knowing your people would not starve, even if storms raged for months. The acorn became more than a nut. It was security, hope, and continuity. There's an elegance in this process that modern eyes often miss. Where you might see a bitter seed, they saw potential. Where you might dismiss drudgery, they saw ritual. Acorn flour was not glamorous, but it was steady, dependable, and abundant. And in that steadiness lay freedom, the freedom to endure, to build, to plan beyond tomorrow. As you finish your imagined bowl of porridge, you find yourself oddly comforted. The flavor may not dazzle, but it fills you in a way fast food never could. It roots you in the patience of rivers, the gift of oaks, the wisdom of ancestors who refused to waste what the land offered. And as the pestles keep pounding in steady rhythm, you realize the sound is more than noise. It's the heartbeat of survival itself. The camp is lively again, and now your attention is drawn to a wide clay pot, suspended over a low fire by a tripod of lashed poles. Steam rises from its mouth in fragrant swirls, and as you peer inside, you recognize a medley of corn, beans, and squash. These three plants, grown together in fields, are often called the Three Sisters, and here they've been transformed into a hearty stew that nourishes both body and spirit. It's a well-established fact in agricultural history that corn, beans, and squash were not only dietary staples, but also companion crops. Corn provided stalks for beans to climb, beans enriched the soil with nitrogen, and squash spread across the ground, shading weeds and preserving moisture. This symbiosis was brilliant farming long before modern science gave it a name. Together, they formed a nutritional powerhouse: carbohydrates, protein, and vitamins that sustained countless native communities. A curious detail is that recipes for Three Sisters stew varied dramatically by region and season. In some camps, dried venison or smoked fish was added for protein. In others, wild herbs, nuts, or peppers gave the dish its unique local flavor. It wasn't a fixed recipe so much as a flexible canvas, changing with whatever the land offered. Imagine tasting the same stew in two different villages and finding one smoky and savory, the other bright with herbs and spice, each a reflection of its people and place. Anthropologists continue to discuss whether the Three Sisters were primarily valued for their agricultural efficiency or their symbolic importance. Some suggest that the harmony of these plants made them metaphors for cooperation and balance within the community. Others insist the symbolism came later, born of necessity first and meaning second. Watching the pot bubble before you, you sense that both are true. It was nourishment for the stomach and a lesson for the soul. The stew thickens as the beans soften, the corn swells, and the squash melts into golden threads. The smell is rich, layered sweet corn mingling with earthy beans, and the faint caramel scent of roasting squash. You lean closer, steam fogging your face, your stomach growling in anticipation. A ladle carved from bone stirs slowly, the cook humming softly under her breath, as though the dish itself requires music to finish. Children run by, tugging at the adults, begging for a taste. They are handed wooden spoons dipped into the pot, and their faces light up at the first mouthful. It's filling, warming, and familiar, a dish that likely marked the turning of seasons, the success of harvests, the reassurance that hunger would not win this year. You might be intrigued to know that in some ceremonies, the Three Sisters stew was offered to guests or spirits first, before being eaten by the community. Food here wasn't only fuel, it was relationship. Eating together meant more than sharing calories, it was weaving bonds of trust and reciprocity. The pot was big, the portions generous, and no one was left out. The clay vessel itself plays a role in the taste. Slightly porous, it allows steam to escape slowly, concentrating flavors. Clay pots were often fired in open flames, hardened just enough to withstand daily cooking yet still fragile by modern standards. To carry one required care, to use one demanded skill. Imagine cradling a pot like this across rocky terrain, every step reminding you that your family's next meal literally rested in your arms. Debates among scholars focus on whether such stews were everyday fare or reserved for gatherings. Some evidence suggests they were staples, eaten often in simpler forms. Other sources hint that elaborate versions, brimming with multiple ingredients, were saved for feasts or ritual events. The line blurs, as survival and celebration were rarely far apart in daily life. As bowls are filled, the sound of spoons tapping echoes through the camp. You take your imagined seat among them, holding a warm wooden bowl, the stew steaming against the cool evening air. The first bite is thick and hearty, the flavors blending into something greater than their parts. You taste the sweetness of corn, the creaminess of beans, the softness of squash, and you feel not just fed but welcomed. The Three Sisters stew embodies more than survival. It embodies wisdom. It reminds you that cooperation yields abundance, that diversity creates strength, and that patience rewards those who tend both soil and relationships. With each spoonful, you are not just eating, you are learning. As night descends and the pot is scraped clean, laughter fills the air. The fire burns low, and you lean back with the warmth of stew in your belly, realizing that this dish has been keeping people alive, united, and hopeful for centuries. Its lessons are as enduring as its flavor, and for a moment, you feel part of that unbroken chain. The night is cool again, and the fire is rebuilt with fresh logs. This time, you see a group kneeling over small lumps of dough, their hands dusted with flour ground earlier from maize and acorns. They pat the dough into thick discs and wrap each one carefully in damp leaves before burying them beneath a layer of warm clay. The mounds look like tiny earthen hills dotting the campfire's edge. Slowly, the ground itself begins to bake the loaves. Archaeological evidence shows that clay-sealed bread was common in regions where pottery was scarce or too fragile for everyday use. The technique left behind layers of hardened earth and traces of carbonized dough, little fossils of meals that fed families centuries ago. It's a reminder that bread so often thought of as a European staple had its own native forms long before colonists arrived with their ovens. You might be surprised to learn that the clay casing wasn't discarded once the bread was cooked. Sometimes it cracked off in satisfying shards, and the inner surface carried a charred aroma that flavored the bread further. Children would even lick the clay shells for traces of sweetness or smoke, treating them like candy wrappers of earth. The image is almost comical, but it speaks to how nothing in this process was wasted. There's an ongoing discussion among historians about whether this clay-baked bread was everyday sustenance or a food for special occasions. Some argue it was practical, perfect for travelers who could carry pre-formed clay bundles ready to be baked when needed. Others believe the ritual of burying and unearthing bread tied it to communal events, perhaps even spiritual gatherings. Watching the careful way the loaves are wrapped and sealed, you sense that both explanations might hold truth. As the loaves bake, the fire's heat seeps through the clay, transforming raw dough into golden, steaming bread. The smell is subtle but comforting, a mixture of maize sweetness, earthy clay, and the faint tang of smoke. Hours pass before the mounds are broken open, revealing bread that is moist within yet crusty on the outside. Steam pours out in fragrant clouds, making mouths water in anticipation. When you finally imagine tearing a piece, the texture surprises you. It's dense, hearty, a little gritty, but filled with warmth and substance. Each bite carries the essence of maize, the leaf wrapper adding hints of green freshness. It isn't fluffy bakery bread, but it fills your stomach with steady strength. In a life where energy for hunting, gathering, and traveling is constant necessity, this kind of bread is more than enough. Some loaves are eaten plain, while others are dipped into stews or smeared with fat rendered from game. The combination is rich, savory, and deeply satisfying. Children chew noisily, their cheeks round, while elders nod approvingly at the familiar flavor. You notice how the bread binds the meal together, transforming simple soups into feasts, turning hunger into comfort. An unusual detail passed down in oral histories is that people sometimes carved symbols into the clay shells before baking patterns of rivers, suns, or animals. These decorations vanished when the clay cracked apart. But for the bakers, they served as small blessings or reminders. The act of making bread became more than feeding the body. It became a quiet form of art. Imagine the scene: the ground dotted with steaming mounds, smoke rising into the night, laughter echoing as loaves are cracked open and shared. The earth itself has been oven, pan, and lid, a kitchen with no walls. You realize that modern baking with its polished steel and glowing thermostats may have gained precision, but perhaps lost some of this intimacy with soil and fire. Scholars continue to question whether the origins of clay-baked bread came from necessity alone or from a symbolic understanding of earth as nurturer. The debate may never be fully answered, but kneeling here, bread warm in your hands, you sense the truth lies in the experience itself. The act of burying food, waiting, then unearthing it, echoes the cycles of planting and harvest, of death and renewal. The loaves are eaten quickly, their warmth fighting off the night chill. As crumbs scatter onto the ground, even birds and small animals benefit, pecking at leftovers. Nothing is wasted, nothing forgotten. When the last piece is gone, and the fire burns low once more, you feel a deep respect for this simple, ancient bread. It isn't just food, it's a dialogue with the land, a reminder that sustenance can emerge from soil, smoke, and patience. The firelight shimmers across the clearing, but tonight the cooking feels different. The pit being dug is wide, deeper than those used for bread, and the workers are more numerous. They line the hollow with stones, heat them until they glow, and then begin layering bundles of meat wrapped in hides and leaves. Judging by the size, this isn't a rabbit or a fish, it's deer, or perhaps even bison, cut into great slabs. The entire community has gathered, voices buzzing with excitement. This is no small meal. This is a feast born of the earth itself. Archaeological studies have uncovered immense roasting pits, some large enough to suggest that whole animals were cooked at once. Layers of charred bone and ash tell stories of gatherings that must have fed dozens, if not hundreds. It's a vivid reminder that native cooking wasn't always about small meals around private fires. Sometimes it was about collective effort and abundance, moments when survival gave way to celebration. You might find it intriguing that some pits were lined with aromatic plants before the meat was laid down. Sage, juniper, or pine needles were spread like a fragrant carpet, seasoning the food as it cooked slowly under the soil. Imagine opening a pit after hours of anticipation and being greeted by meat infused with the forest itself. The aroma alone would feel like a reward for patience. Scholars debate whether these massive pit feasts were reserved for special occasions, harvest festivals, treaty gatherings, or spiritual ceremonies, or whether they were simply practical ways to cook large game. Some argue that the sheer effort required, from digging to heating to burying, suggests ritual significance. Others believe that when hunters brought down a large animal, such pits were simply the most efficient way to cook it for an entire camp. Both views carry weight, and standing here, you see how easily the practical can blur into the sacred when food and community intertwine. The process is deliberate and laborious. First, the stones must be heated until they're white hot, a task that takes hours of burning. Then the meat, wrapped carefully in layers of hide and leaves, is lowered in. More stones are placed on top, followed by soil, until the mound looks like nothing more than a freshly turned patch of earth. The heat trapped inside will slowly roast the contents for most of the night. Families gather nearby, singing or telling stories, their anticipation building with each passing hour. When at last the mound is broken open, steam billows out like breath from the earth itself. The scent is staggering: rich meat, herbs, and smoke, mingling into a fragrance so powerful it makes your eyes water. People crowd close, their hunger sharp. But there is reverence too. This is food shared by many hands. and it is treated with gratitude. The meat is carved and portioned carefully. Each piece is tender, juices running down fingers as they're passed from one person to the next. Children's eyes widen as they bite into chunks that nearly melt in their mouths. Elders close their eyes, savoring the richness. For a moment, silence descends a community, united by the simple, primal act of eating together. A fascinating but lesser-known detail is that bones from such feasts were sometimes arranged deliberately afterward, either buried in patterns or left in piles as markers. Some researchers believe this was a way of honoring the animal's spirit, ensuring balance between what was taken and what was given back. To you, it suggests that every part of the process, from hunt to feast to disposal, carried meaning far beyond the physical act of eating. You can feel the heat of the pit long after the food is removed, radiating into the night air. It becomes a gathering spot even after the meal is done, children warming their hands, adults discussing plans for the next hunt or the coming winter. The pit itself, once filled with food, now holds conversation, laughter, and memory. Experts continue to discuss whether such grand cooking methods influenced neighboring tribes through trade and migration. Similar pits appear across vast distances, from the Pacific coast to the Great Plains, leading some to suggest widespread cultural exchange. Others argue that the technique was so logical, using earth and stone to trap heat, that it could have arisen independently in many places. Whatever the case, the persistence of this method proves its effectiveness. As the night deepens, you sit back, belly full, body warmed, listening to the low hum of voices around you. The stars arch overhead, steady and timeless, while the pit still smoulders faintly, its duty fulfilled. You realize you've witnessed not just a meal but a ceremony of togetherness, where food was both sustenance and celebration. In that warmth, you understand. Survival was never just about eating quickly to stay alive. It was about feasting, remembering, giving thanks, and weaving individuals into a whole. The earth pit was more than a tool, it was a stage upon which community itself was cooked into being. The morning mist lingers over the wetlands, and your ears catch the swish of paddles in shallow water. Canoes glide through tall reeds, their passengers bending to harvest stalks heavy with dark grains. They are gathering wild rice, the food of lakes and rivers, a grain that looks delicate yet holds the power to feed entire villages through harsh winters. Each stroke of the paddle rustles the reeds, releasing seeds that fall into the water, ensuring the cycle continues for future harvests. The water is alive with birds swooping overhead, fish darting beneath, and the laughter of children balancing carefully at the canoe's edge. Archaeological finds around the Great Lakes region confirm that wild rice harvesting has deep roots, stretching back thousands of years. Charred seeds, canoe fragments, and woven storage mats reveal how central this aquatic grain was to daily survival. For some tribes, wild rice was more than food, it was identity, woven into origin stories and ceremonies. Even the name given to the plant in several native languages translates as the good berry, or the food that grows on water. One charming but little-known practice during the harvest was to sing to the rice. Harvesters sometimes hummed or chanted softly as they bent the stalks over the canoe, tapping them gently with sticks so the grains fell inside. The songs were both rhythm and blessing, a way of aligning the body's work with the spirit of the plant. You can almost hear those melodies now, soft voices drifting across misty water, as grains rain down like gentle applause. Some scholars suggest that wild rice was cultivated deliberately, with careful attention to water levels and seasonal cycles, while others argue it remained largely a gift of nature, gathered rather than farmed. The debate continues, but either way, what you see here is a partnership with the environment, neither domination nor passivity, but balance. Once collected, the rice requires work before it can be eaten. The grains are spread out on mats to dry in the sun, their green husks turning brittle. Then comes parching, rice roasted over fire in clay pots or iron kettles in later times, a process that loosens the husks while deepening the flavor. The smell is nutty, earthy, and intoxicating, curling upward in wisps of smoke. You close your eyes and imagine standing by the fire, the sound of grains popping softly as if applauding their own transformation. Next, the rice is threshed. People step into pits lined with hide or bark, their moccasin-clad feet gently trampling the parched grains to loosen the hulls. Children laugh as they watch, perhaps even joining in, turning work into play. Finally, the rice is tossed into the air in birch bark trays, the wind carrying away the light husks while the heavier kernels fall back, clean and ready. The motion is hypnotic, a dance of grain and wind that feels almost ceremonial. When cooked, wild rice expands and unfurls into tender, chewy strands, its flavor deep and earthy. A pot of it simmers now over the fire, the aroma mingling with smoke and lake breeze. It's served with fish caught that morning, or stirred into stews thick with venison and root vegetables. Each spoonful tastes of water and land, of patience and gratitude. It is a food that fills not just stomachs but spirits. A delightful tidbit is that wild rice feasts often ended with music and games. After the meal, when bellies were full, drums came out, and the community danced to celebrate the bounty. The harvest was not only about calories, it was about joy, connection, and continuity. Food and festival intertwined, so that eating became an act of thanksgiving. Researchers still discuss whether such gatherings were primarily practical, designed to coordinate large-scale harvests, or whether they served as social glue, binding different clans together through shared labor and shared meals. Watching the canoes glide across the water and the fires glowing on shore, you see both. People fed their bodies, yes, but they also fed relationships, alliances, and memory. You lift your imagined bowl of steaming rice, chew slowly, and feel the chewiness between your teeth, the earthy depth grounding you like roots in the soil. Around you, children laugh, elders smile, and the lake reflects the sky in silver ripples. The grain that grew on water has become food, story, and song all at once. And in this simple, rich meal, you sense the heart of a culture that knew how to live with the land rather than against it. As evening falls, the fires die down, the rice stores are tucked safely into bark containers, and the canoes are drawn up onto shore. The lake lies quiet again, its gift accepted with gratitude. You rest in the fading light, warmed by food and story, realizing that wild rice is not just sustenance, it is relationship, renewal, and resilience. The glow of dawn filters through the trees, and the camp stirs with a sweetness unlike anything you've smelled before. Thin wooden troughs are lined along a row of fires, and in each one bubbles a pale, watery liquid slowly thickening under steady heat. The air itself seems sticky, filled with the scent of caramelizing sugar. You follow the trail to its source, sap dripping from freshly cut notches in maple trees, collected overnight in bark containers, and now boiled into syrup. This is no ordinary breakfast, this is a transformation of tree blood into liquid gold. Archaeological evidence and oral histories confirm that maple sap was used long before Europeans arrived. The earliest records by colonists describe native families tapping trees with sharpened bone or stone tools, inserting wooden spouts to guide the sap into containers. For generations, the process was as natural as harvesting corn or hunting deer, a seasonal ritual that marked the turning of winter into spring. Curiously enough, not all sap was boiled to syrup. Sometimes it was consumed directly as a refreshing drink, sweet and watery, like nature's energy tonic. Children especially delighted in sipping it cold from bark cups, their mouths sticky afterward. Imagine the surprise of tasting something so delicate after months of eating mostly dried meat and stored nuts. It must have felt like drinking sunshine. Scholars continue to discuss whether syrup making began as an accident, perhaps someone left sap too close to a fire, or whether it was a deliberate innovation. Some argue that such precise control over heat and timing suggests long experimentation. Others claim it was a stroke of luck, turned into tradition. Either way, the knowledge spread widely, becoming a cherished seasonal event. The boiling process is mesmerizing. Sap starts thin and clear, but as water evaporates, it thickens and darkens, shifting from pale gold to rich amber. You watch as steam curls into the sky, carrying a fragrance that makes your mouth water. The cooks stir constantly with wooden paddles, careful not to scorch the precious liquid. Every drop represents hours of work. 40 buckets of sap might yield only a single bucket of syrup. Patience is essential, and patience here is a practiced art. Once thick enough, the syrup is poured into smaller containers, sometimes gourds or clay pots, where it cools into sticky sweetness. In colder regions, the sap might even be left to freeze, the water rising to the top as ice while the concentrated sugar sinks below. Cleverly, they used winter's own hand to refine their syrup. You might smile at the thought that maple sugar boiled even further until crystallized was one of the few concentrated sweets available before trade brought cane sugar. These cakes of hardened sugar were portable, easy to store, and treasured. Children would nibble on them like candy, while adults saved them for ceremonies or to sweeten special dishes. Imagine tasting a stew thickened with a drizzle of syrup, or roasted squash glazed in maple sweetness. Even dried meats could be coated, turning survival food into something bordering on indulgence. The versatility made maple not just a luxury but a cornerstone of flavor, transforming the harsh monotony of winter diets into something hopeful. Some anthropologists highlight the communal aspect of sugaring season. Families and neighboring groups often work together, tapping dozens of trees and tending multiple fires. The camps became festive, filled with laughter, music, and anticipation. Syrup making was not only about calories, it was about celebrating renewal, marking the end of cold scarcity and the beginning of abundance. There's a lesser-known detail. Some tribes told stories about a time when sap flowed thick like syrup straight from the tree. According to legend, people grew lazy, drinking it constantly until the creator thinned it to watery sap, forcing them to work for their sweetness. The tale wasn't just myth, it was a reminder that effort is what gives value to reward. You sit cross-legged, holding a small wooden cup of syrup between your palms. It's warm, sticky, and almost glowing in the firelight. A taste on your tongue floods your senses rich, deep, sweet but earthy, like drinking the forest itself. It's impossible not to smile. After long nights of smoky stews and roasted meats, this sweetness feels almost miraculous. Experts remain intrigued by how widespread maple tapping became. Was it shared through trade routes stretching across woodlands, or did different groups discover it independently? The evidence remains debated, but the persistence of the practice suggests its significance was undeniable. Wherever maples grew, people found ways to coax their hidden treasure into nourishment. As the fires die down and the last batches are poured, children dart around with sticky fingers, laughing. Adults sip slowly, savoring. The forest is quiet again, but the air still carries that faint caramel note, like a promise that spring has arrived. You lick your lips and realize that even without modern kitchens, they discovered something extraordinary, a sweetness that could brighten even the darkest winters. The fires are low this evening, burning steady, and you notice two heavy grinding stones set side by side near the edge of the camp. One is broad and flat, pitted from use. The other fits neatly in the palm of a woman's hand. She presses the smaller stone against the larger and begins moving it back and forth in slow, deliberate strokes. The sound is rhythmic, a gentle scrape like waves against the shore. Grain by grain, yellow maize kernels are crushed into fine flour. You lean closer, realizing you're watching one of the most vital acts of daily survival. Archaeologists have uncovered countless manos and metates the paired stones used to grind maize in villages across the Americas. The wear marks tell stories of years, even generations of use. Some stones were so worn they formed deep hollows, evidence of thousands of meals prepared on the same surface. It's widely recognized that grinding maize wasn't just a chore, It was the heartbeat of daily life, as essential as fire itself. An odd but telling detail is how these grinding stones sometimes traveled with families when they moved, despite their weight. Imagine carrying a massive slab of rock across miles of wilderness because it had become inseparable from your cooking. It wasn't only a tool, it was memory and continuity, linking past meals to future ones. Experts continue to discuss whether grinding was considered laborious drudgery or whether it was understood as a communal, even meditative act. Some accounts describe women singing while they ground maize, their voices rising and falling with the scrape of stone, turning monotony into music. Others suggest that the work was simply endured, a necessity that consumed hours each day. Watching now, you sense both exhaustion in the repetitive motion, but also grace in the rhythm, like prayer carried on stone. The flour itself is versatile. Once ground, it can be mixed with water to form dough for flatbreads, boiled into porridge, or combined with beans and vegetables in stews. Tonight, you see a woman mixing the fresh flour with water in a shallow clay bowl. Forming patties, she lays carefully on a flat stone warmed by fire. Soon, the aroma of toasting maize fills the air, nutty, rich, faintly sweet. The smell makes your stomach tighten with hunger, even before the first patty is turned. Children hover nearby, waiting impatiently. They know the taste well. Hot, smoky cakes, crisp at the edges and soft inside. Their faces glow in the firelight as they tear into the first pieces, blowing on them quickly before taking eager bites. You can almost hear the crunch, feel the warmth on your tongue, the simple satisfaction of maize transformed by fire and stone. A fascinating yet little-known trick was to mix ash into the maize dough, a practice that released more nutrients by changing its chemistry. Modern science calls it nixtamalization, but for these cooks, it was intuitive knowledge passed down through trial and observation. The result was not only better flavor but also stronger bodies, proof that survival rested on wisdom as much as on effort. The grinding stones themselves were more than utensils, they were heirlooms. Some were passed down through generations, their surfaces carrying the marks of countless hands. Imagine touching the same stone your grandmother touched, pressing into it with the same rhythm, feeding your children as she once fed hers. The act connects you across time, binding family and memory into every grain. Anthropologists sometimes debate whether maize spread more quickly because of its farming potential or because of its adaptability in the kitchen. After all, a crop is only as useful as the meals it can produce. Standing here, you realize the answer is both. Corn wasn't just a plant, it was a canvas, endlessly adaptable, ready to be porridge, bread, stew, or cake. The sound of grinding continues into the night, steady and patient. It becomes background music to the camp, the scrape of survival, the rhythm of sustenance. You lean back, your hands dusted in imaginary flour, and feel the comfort of knowing that with nothing more than stone, fire, and patience, a kernel can become a meal. When the last cakes are shared and the flour stored in bark containers, the stones are set aside, ready for tomorrow. Their surfaces gleam faintly in the firelight, worn smooth by centuries of care. And you realize that while pots may crack, fires may die, and people may pass, these stones endure, carrying the weight of tradition across ages. The camp is quiet under the sun, and you notice strips of meat draped over long wooden racks. They hang like ribbons in the breeze, darkening slowly under its touch. The fire beneath them smolders, giving off more smoke than flame. This is no ordinary roasting, it is preservation. The meat will become jerky, lean and tough, but capable of lasting months without spoiling. In a world without iceboxes or refrigerators, this practice was not luxury, it was survival. Archaeological evidence across plains, deserts, and forests shows clear proof of this technique. Scattered bones, drying racks reconstructed from post holes, and even desiccated meat scraps preserved in caves tell us that sun-drying and smoking were essential lifelines. Hunters returning with a buffalo or deer knew they had more than one night's feast. They had days of labor to ensure the animal's gift endured. Without preservation, abundance one day could mean famine the next. One curious but ingenious method involved mixing the dried meat with rendered fat and berries, pounding it all together into a dense paste called pemmican. It was calorie-rich, portable, and astonishingly durable, capable of lasting for years if stored well. Imagine chewing into a bar of pemmican, its texture heavy and greasy, its flavor a strange marriage of meat and sweetness. It might not charm your modern palate, but in winter, it was the difference between life and death. Anthropologists remain divided on whether jerky and pemmican were developed independently by multiple groups or spread widely through trade and contact. Some argue the similarities across regions point to shared knowledge. Others insist necessity would have led people everywhere to discover drying as the obvious answer. The debate continues, but what you see here is evidence enough of human ingenuity echoing across landscapes. The process requires patience. Strips of meat are sliced thin, ensuring that wind and sun can reach every surface. They are draped carefully to avoid contact with dirt or insects, though smoke helps keep flies at bay. The smell is sharp, smoky, slightly metallic, carried on the breeze until the whole camp seems perfumed with survival. The sight of so much meat hanging together is both reassuring and sobering. It means food security, but it also signals the enormity of the kill that made it possible. Children are warned not to snatch early strips, though their fingers itch with temptation. Elders explain that haste ruins the work. If the meat is eaten before it is fully dried, it risks sickness. So they wait. Their patience trained not only by hunger but by tradition. Waiting becomes part of the lesson, teaching discipline as much as cooking. A lesser-known detail is how dried meat wasn't always eaten plain. Sometimes it was softened in hot water, turning back into something resembling fresh meat, or crumbled into stews to add protein and flavor. In this way, a single deer could stretch into countless meals, each one reshaped by fire, water, and imagination. You picture hunters on long journeys, carrying bundles of jerky tied in hides, chewing slowly as they walked. Each strip gave strength to cover more miles, climb more ridges, and survive more storms. The food was lightweight, portable, and dependable, a companion as much as nourishment. Even today, when you bite into a strip of jerky from a store, you echo that lineage of travelers who chewed and endured under the same Sunday. Scholars also point out the social role of meat preservation. Large kills demanded cooperation, cutting, slicing, hanging, tending fires. No single person could manage it alone. In this way, jerky making bound communities together, reinforcing the principle that survival was collective, not solitary. Watching the racks sway in the wind, you see more than food. You see teamwork turned into sustenance. As evening falls, the strips harden, their color dark and rich. Some are already ready to store, packed into bark containers or wrapped in hides to keep moisture out. The sight of those bundles gives comfort, each one a promise that hunger will not win when snow arrives. The people relax, laughter rising again, their future secured by the day's labor. You close your eyes and imagine chewing a piece. Dry, chewy, smoky, stubborn against your teeth, but slowly releasing its strength. It isn't glamorous, but it steadies you, carrying warmth from one day into the next. Jerky is memory concentrated, a bridge between the abundance of today and the scarcity of tomorrow. When the last of the racks are checked and the fires burn low, the camp settles into calm. The meat sways gently in the breeze, whispering promises of endurance. And you realize that while the food may be simple, the wisdom behind it is immense, proof that people knew how to transform a fleeting hunt into lasting life. The fire tonight burns steady, and instead of racks or pits, your eyes are drawn to the rounded shapes of clay pots resting in the coals. Their surfaces are darkened with soot, their bellies glowing faintly from the heat within. Now you see cooking not by improvisation, but by craftsmanship. Pottery has entered the scene, and with it, the menu expands in ways you hadn't yet imagined. Archaeologists have unearthed countless shards of clay vessels scattered across ancient village sites, some decorated with intricate designs, others plain and practical. The dates stretch back thousands of years, proving that long before European arrival, native communities had already mastered the art of shaping earth into durable cookware. It's widely recognized that the invention and spread of pottery marked a turning point in how food could be prepared, stored, and shared. One unusual but fascinating detail is that some pots were deliberately tempered with crushed shells or sand mixed into the clay. This prevented cracking under heat and made them more resilient. The texture might have looked crude to modern eyes, but the technique reveals a deep understanding of materials. Imagine kneeling over the fire, placing a pot you shaped yourself, knowing that it carries not just soup but also the memory of hands that molded, dried, and fired it. Researchers remain divided on whether pottery first developed in one cultural hub and spread outward, or whether it emerged independently in multiple regions. Some evidence points to shared styles across vast distances, hinting at trade and migration. Others suggest that communities simply discovered the technique on their own, since the need to cook more efficiently was universal. The truth, like the pots themselves, may hold pieces of many stories. The pot before you tonight simmers with a stew of fish, beans, and wild greens. The clay holds the heat steadily, allowing flavors to mingle more deeply than roasting ever could. You catch the bubbling sound, a low murmur like the voice of the earth itself, and steam rises in fragrant curls. The smell is rich smoke from the fire, sweetness from the beans, briny notes from the fish. You lean closer, eyes watering from the smoke, stomach tightening with hunger. Children play nearby, their laughter punctuating the rhythm of the simmer. Every so often, one darts in to peer into the pot, only to be shooed away with a smile. The community waits together, because meals made this way are meant to be shared, not hoarded. You imagine the anticipation, the way a single pot binds dozens of lives into one circle of patience. Clay pots made it possible to cook softer foods for elders and children, soups, porridges, herbal teas. This wasn't just convenience, it was compassion woven into technology. A pot simmering gently could turn tough grains into digestible porridge, or roots into medicine, ensuring no one was left behind by the limits of their teeth or stomach. A charming tidbit is that some pots bore designs thought to represent water, clouds, or plants, linking the vessel to the very things it cooked. Food didn't just fill the pot, it fulfilled the symbols scratched on its side. To eat from it was to recognize your place within a larger story. The river, the field, the sky, all mingling in one humble stew. The pot is finally lifted from the coals with long sticks, its surface hissing faintly as it cools. Ladles carved from bone or wood scoop out portions into smaller bowls. Each person receives a share, steaming and fragrant. You take an imagined sip and feel the warmth coat your throat, the fish delicate, the greens sharp, the beans creamy. It isn't only flavor, it's comfort, crafted from earth and fire working in harmony. Some anthropologists argue that pottery fundamentally changed social life, allowing for surplus storage and more elaborate feasts. Others insist that it was simply another step in an ongoing tradition of adapting tools to needs. Whichever view you lean toward, the clay pot in front of you proves that innovation need not be loud or flashy. Sometimes it is quiet, resting in coals, turning simple ingredients into a meal that nourishes body and community alike. As the bowls empty and the pot sits cooling, you reflect on how far the journey has already come from bark and stone improvisations to the durability of fired earth. Each step feels like progress, but also continuity, each method still alive in memory and practice. The clay pot crackles faintly as it cools, as though sighing with relief after its labor. And you realize it isn't just an object, it is an ancestor too, a vessel shaped by human hands to carry fire's gift into tomorrow. The air is cool and damp tonight, carrying with it the faint perfume of herbs crushed beneath bare feet. Near the fire, women and men gather bundles of wild onions, garlic, and sage collected earlier in the day. Their arms are full of green stalks and pungent bulbs, and soon the sharp, spicy fragrance rises as they chop the plants on flat stones. You've smelled stews and smoked meats before, but now something new fills the air. Flavor crafted not from salt or imported spices, but from the wild heart of the land itself. Archaeological traces of charred onion bulbs, mint leaves, and other wild plants confirm that seasoning food was no accident. It's well established that native cooks knew how to identify edible herbs and roots, folding them into dishes both for taste and for health. The meals were never bland. They carried the tang of wild garlic, the sharpness of onion, or the sweetness of mint, each plant chosen with care and memory. You might be delighted to learn that wild onions were sometimes eaten raw, as a sort of campfire snack, their pungency making eyes water and mouths burn. Children dared each other to chew them straight from the ground, squealing at the sharp bite. Even so, when added to a bubbling stew, the harshness mellowed into sweetness, proving that even the fiercest flavors could be tamed by patience and fire. Scholars remain divided on whether these plants were gathered primarily for their culinary qualities or for their medicinal uses. Garlic and onions, after all, have antibacterial properties, and sage was often burned in rituals of cleansing. Was the seasoning of food a matter of taste, or was it also a kind of medicine disguised as flavor? The lines blur here, and as steam rises fragrant from the pot, you realize the answer might be both. The herbs are tossed into clay pots, simmering with maize and venison. Immediately, the broth brightens, the sharp aroma cutting through the heaviness of meat. Steam curls upward, and you imagine the first sip savory, earthy, tinged with sweetness, carrying the freshness of green fields even in the dead of winter. This is no mere survival food. This is cuisine, shaped by knowledge of plants and seasons. Sometimes, roots like cattail or sweet flag were added too, their subtle flavors enhancing soups while contributing nourishment. Other times, dried berries were sprinkled in, offering a surprising burst of sweetness. These combinations weren't haphazard. They were crafted by experience, a memory of which plant grew where, which leaf was safe, which root turned bitter if cooked too long. Every mouthful was both meal and lesson. An overlooked but fascinating detail is how seasoning often became communal. Families shared herbs with neighbors, especially during winter when fresh greens were scarce. A pot of stew might carry the flavor of not just one gatherer's knowledge, but of many hands pooling their resources. The taste, then, was not only of plants, but of generosity. You crouch closer to the pot, watching the herbs soften, their oils shimmering on the surface. A woman dips a carved ladle, lifts a spoonful to her lips, and nods. Satisfied, she begins serving the stew into bowls. The first taste warms you instantly. The onions sweet, the sage earthy, the garlic mellow. You can almost feel your body responding, not just fed, but fortified. Researchers debate whether flavor was considered indulgence or necessity. Some argue that herbs were crucial to making otherwise monotonous diets bearable. Others believe they carried deeper cultural meanings, each plant symbolizing connections to spirits, seasons, or ancestors. Either way, it's clear that flavor mattered. The land was not just a pantry, it was a pharmacy, a spice rack, and a teacher all at once. As bowls are passed around, children wrinkle their noses at the pungent steam, only to smile after tasting the softened sweetness. Elders murmur approval, recalling how the same herbs once grew in abundance near their childhood homes. Laughter and memory season the meal further, until the pot is scraped clean. You lean back, the fire crackling, your belly warmed by this imagined stew, and you realize something profound. Survival here was never just about filling the stomach. It was about crafting food that delighted, healed, and connected people to land and kin. Flavor, in all its pungent, bitter, sweet, and fragrant forms, was the bridge between necessity and joy. The fire burns lower, casting shadows across the herb bundles drying nearby. Tomorrow they will be used again, tucked into pockets of meat, scattered over broths, or steeped into teas. Tonight, though, their work is done. And you, drowsy and full, understand that even in a world without salt shakers or spice markets, meals were far from bland. They were symphonies of the forest, composed leaf by leaf, root by root. The evening grows still, and you hear the rhythmic clatter of tools that seem almost musical. A group of men and women are working over hides, stretched across wooden frames, scraping them with sharpened pieces of bone and antler. At first you think they are tanning skins for clothing, but soon you realize some of these tools are destined for the kitchen. Bones and antlers are being shaped into pounders, awls, and spatulas, implements that will help transform raw ingredients into meals. Without metal, bone was chef's knife, mortar, and whisk combined. Archaeological digs reveal an astonishing variety of these bone and antler tools: scrapers for cutting fat, chisels for splitting nuts, pestles for pounding grain. Many are polished smooth from years of use, their surfaces worn by countless meals. It's widely recognized that such tools were not temporary improvisations but carefully crafted instruments, as essential as the fire itself. They extended human hands, giving them sharper edges, stronger pounding power, and finer control over food. One curious detail is that certain bones were preferred for specific tasks. Elk antlers, dense and strong, became pounding tools for maize. Bird bones, hollow and lightweight, made delicate straws for sipping broths or for blowing on embers to stoke fires. Even fish bones found second lives as needles for sewing bark or hide containers. Imagine how nothing was wasted. The hunt provided not only meat but also the very utensils used to prepare it. Some anthropologists argue that the crafting of bone cooking tools carried symbolic meaning. Transforming the remains of animals into implements ensured their spirits continued to nourish the community. Others maintain that this was simply a matter of pragmatism, the most efficient way to use every available resource. The debate lingers, but as you watch the glow of firelight glint off polished antler, it's hard not to sense reverence in the hands shaping them. The tools are soon put to use. A woman kneels with a heavy antler pestle, pounding roasted maize into coarse flour on a stone slab. Each strike sends a dull thud through the ground, a heartbeat of labor. Another uses a bone scraper to slice fat from venison, dropping the white pieces into a clay pot to render into cooking oil. The smell of sizzling fat rises, rich and savory, making your stomach tighten in anticipation. You might be amused to know that some of these bone scrapers doubled as eating tools. Children gnawed meat directly off bones, then kept the cleaned remains as makeshift spoons or spreaders. A rib bone polished smooth could stir soup, spread mashed berries, or even serve as a serving spatula. Imagine holding one, warm from the pot, realizing how perfectly the curve fits your hand, as though designed by nature itself. The sounds of bone tools at work create a unique rhythm: pounding, scraping, cracking. It blends with the snap of fire and the murmur of voices, becoming a kind of background music for camp life. To outsiders it might sound crude, but to those here, it is the daily symphony of survival. Each sound signals progress: fat rendered, maize ground, meat sliced, stew stirred. Scholars point out that bone and antler tools also reveal something about social organization. The making of them required skill, patience, and knowledge of animal anatomy. Teaching younger generations to craft and use them wasn't only practical but cultural, embedding values of respect for animals and responsibility for resources. A broken scraper wasn't trash, it was reshaped into a smaller tool, then perhaps into an ornament. Even fragments carried use. When the meal is finally ready, the results of these tools shine through. Maize flour stirred with rendered fat becomes cakes roasted on flat stones. Venison trimmed with scrapers simmers tenderly in broth, seasoned with herbs pounded fine by bone pestles. The flavors you taste, smoky, savory, earthy, are born from the silent labor of bones turned into hands' companions. A fascinating tidbit: in some regions, Antler pounders were decorated with carvings of animals or patterns. These weren't just tools, they were miniature works of art, linking daily cooking with storytelling. To pound maize with a pestle carved in the shape of a deer was to remember the hunt, the gift, and the cycle of life. Every meal became layered with memory and meaning. You sit back, chewing on an imagined piece of maize cake, and glance at the tools lying nearby. They glisten faintly in the firelight, ordinary yet extraordinary. Without them, cooking would be harder, slower, less precise. With them, survival becomes art. And you realize that while modern kitchens boast stainless steel knives and mixers that buzz with electricity, here survival was sustained by ingenuity, the transformation of bone into blade, antler into hammer, fish spine into needle. The tools may seem simple, but the knowledge behind them is profound, woven into every bite you taste. As night settles deeper, the tools are cleaned and stored, set carefully beside the fire for tomorrow. They are not disposable, they are partners. And as you close your eyes, you hear again the steady thud of pestles, the scrape of scrapers, a lullaby of bone and fire that carried countless generations through hunger into fullness. The waves crash gently against the shoreline, and the salty tang of sea air mixes with wood smoke rising from driftwood fires. Here, far from forests and cornfields, food comes from the tides. Families gather at low tide, baskets in hand, prying clams and mussels from rocks slick with seaweed. Soon heaps of shellfish grow high beside the fire, gleaming wet in the moonlight. You step closer and realize you are witnessing a coastal feast unlike anything you've seen inland. Archaeological sites along the Atlantic and Pacific coasts are littered with enormous shell middens, piles of discarded clam and oyster shells that rise like artificial hills. These remnants, some thousands of years old, testify to generations of seafood feasts. It's widely accepted that these shell mounds were more than garbage heaps. They were historical records of diets, gatherings, and seasonal rhythms. They prove that shellfish were not occasional snacks but central pillars of coastal survival. You might be intrigued to learn that shell mounds sometimes grew so large that later villages were built directly atop them. Imagine homes and fires resting on the bones of countless meals, the very ground a monument to centuries of cooking. What modern city can say the same, that its foundations are literally the shells of its suppers? Experts continue to debate whether large-scale clam bakes were purely practical, a way to cook many shellfish at once, or whether they carried ceremonial weight. The effort of gathering, heating rocks, and layering seaweed suggests more than convenience. Some anthropologists believe these feasts also reinforced community ties, marking seasonal abundance and offering thanks to the ocean. Watching now, you sense both hunger and reverence mingled in the smoky air. The cooking method is ingenious. A pit is dug into the sand, lined with stones heated in the fire until glowing. Layers of seaweed are laid atop, followed by clams, mussels, crabs, and sometimes even fish. More seaweed is piled over, trapping steam. The mound hisses as seawater trapped in the plants sizzles against the rocks, releasing a briny vapor that smells of the sea itself. The pit is covered with sand, and then comes the waiting. As the hours pass, the beach transforms. Children chase gulls, elders share stories, and the ocean provides its steady percussion. When the pit is finally uncovered, a cloud of fragrant steam bursts forth, thick with the scent of brine and smoke. The shellfish inside gape open, their flesh glistening, infused with the taste of seaweed and fire. The first bite is a revelation, salty, tender, smoky, tasting of both ocean and earth. You imagine slurping a clam straight from its shell, the juices dripping down your chin. The flavor is primal, direct, without need for seasoning. It is as though the sea itself has served its own dish. One lesser-known practice was to dry leftover shellfish meat in the sun, preserving it for later use. These dried morsels could be crumbled into stews or chewed on long journeys, portable bites of the ocean. In this way, a single clam bake could provide not only a feast but also food security for days to come. The shell mounds left behind tell their own stories. Some layers are darkened with ash, suggesting fires burned directly atop them, while others show evidence of sorting, as though certain shells were kept aside for tools or ornaments. Even in disposal, nothing was wasted. Shells became scrapers, beads, and even temper for pottery. The feast echoed long after the last clam was eaten. Anthropologists point out that such gatherings weren't only about food, they were about identity. To eat from the sea together was to affirm belonging to place and people. The ocean was not simply a pantry. It was a relative, its gifts acknowledged with gratitude and ritual. You sit cross-legged on the sand, watching the sun sink into the horizon, a clam shell warm in your hand. Around you, laughter carries on the wind, mingling with the crash of waves. The fire glows, gulls circle, and the mound of steaming shellfish continues to shrink as hungry hands reach in. By the end, the feast leaves behind only empty shells, stacked in piles that will one day form new middens. You realize you are standing on history being written in calcium and ash, layer upon layer of meals that sustained lives. What you taste is not only food but continuity, the enduring bond between ocean and human hunger. As the tide creeps back in and washes the sand smooth, the fire dies to embers. The people drift away, bellies full, voices soft with contentment. And you remain, holding the shell in your palm, marveling at how the sea itself has been kitchen, table, and feast in one. The fire is alive again, but this time you notice a pot set low among the embers, its surface glistening with something thick and golden. A strong, savory aroma rises rich and heavy, unlike the sharp smoke of dried meat or the sweetness of maple. Someone is stirring slowly with a wooden paddle, watching as fat melts from chunks of animal tissue. You realize this is rendering, the slow art of coaxing oil and grease from flesh and bone. Without frying pans or butter churns, rendered fat was the essential medium of cooking, as vital as fire itself. Archaeologists examining ancient sites often find stones and pottery darkened with greasy residues, evidence that fat played a central role in native cooking. It is widely accepted that no part of a hunted animal was wasted, and fat, though easily overlooked, was among the most prized. In a world where calories meant survival, fat was not indulgence, but insurance. One curious detail is that marrow bones were sometimes cracked open directly at the fire, their rich contents scooped out with sticks or fingers. Children especially loved this delicacy, treating it as a kind of candy. Imagine the satisfaction of warm, buttery marrow sliding onto your tongue during a freezing winter night. It was comfort in its purest form. Researchers still discuss whether rendering was primarily about preservation, creating fat that could coat jerky and keep it edible, or whether it was equally about enhancing flavor. Some evidence suggests that the rich taste was as cherished as the practical value. You watch the fat bubble now, its surface shimmering, and you suspect both answers are true, nourishment and delight bound together. The rendered fat, once clarified, is poured into small bark or clay containers, where it cools into pale cakes. These will be used later to fry strips of meat, enrich soups, or mix with berries and nuts. The result is food that not only sustains but satisfies. Imagine dipping a piece of roasted bread into hot grease, the crust soaking up flavor until every bite drips with richness. Sometimes, fat was mixed with ground seeds or dried grains to create compact travel rations. The combination provided long-lasting energy, crucial for hunts or migrations. You can almost feel the heaviness of such food, dense and oily, sitting in your stomach like a promise of strength for the miles ahead. An unusual but ingenious practice involved using fat as a cooking surface. Flat stones were coated in grease before dough or meat was laid upon them, preventing sticking and creating a sizzling crust. The sound alone, meat snapping and hissing against hot stone, would have set mouths watering across the camp. The role of fat extended beyond taste. It was medicine, salve, and fuel for lamps. The same grease that fried venison could soothe cracked skin or feed a flame through a long winter night. This versatility meant it was treated with reverence, carefully collected and stored. Nothing so valuable was ever allowed to drip uselessly into the fire. You lean closer, the scent enveloping you smoky, heavy, mouth-watering. It's the smell of abundance, rare enough in a world where hunger was constant companion. The bubbling pot seems almost alive, each pop of grease a reminder of the animal's gift, transformed into sustenance and warmth. Some anthropologists argue that the use of fat marked a leap in culinary sophistication, allowing flavors to deepen and ingredients to mingle in new ways. Others caution against romanticizing it, noting that rendering was often born from sheer necessity. Still, both views acknowledge its central role. Without fat, survival would have been colder, leaner, harsher. Picture now a scene after the rendering is complete. Bowls of stew enriched with oil, bread dipped and gleaming, dried meat softened in sizzling grease. The people eat slowly, savoring each bite, aware of the strength they are storing for tomorrow. Even children, greasy-faced and laughing, understand that what coats their lips is not waste but wealth. The pot is set aside, its contents cooling. Tomorrow, those cakes of fat will be cut into portions, tucked into storage, and carried on journeys. The smell will cling to everything, clothes, hair, even the air, but no one minds. To smell of grease is to smell of security. As the fire flickers and the night closes in, you realize that rendered fat was more than an ingredient. It was a foundation, invisible in the final dish, yet present in every bite. It turned the meager into the hearty, the plain into the satisfying, and in its shimmering surface you glimpse the truth of survival. Sometimes life endures not in glamour or abundance, but in the quiet alchemy of turning what might seem waste into sustenance. The night is heavy with stars, and you watch hunters return from the plains carrying not only meat but the great stomach and intestines of a buffalo. At first you recoil, unsure what role these organs could play in a kitchen, but soon you see women cleaning them carefully, rinsing in streams, scraping with bone tools, inflating them like balloons to test for leaks. Laughter rings out as children poke at the slippery surfaces, but the mood is serious because these stomachs are not waste. Tonight, they are cooking pots. Archaeological evidence supports this practice. Fragments of charred stomach linings and reports from early explorers confirm that the bellies of large animals were used as vessels long before iron kettles appeared. It's well established that the stomach's natural shape makes it perfect for holding liquids, and with clever use of hot stones, even soups could be prepared without a single piece of pottery. You might be surprised to learn that intestines, too, were cleaned and tied at one end, filled with broths or even grains, and suspended near fire to cook. The result resembled a primitive sausage, both portable and nourishing. Imagine the delight of biting into such food after a day of hard travel, savory, filling, and neatly packaged by nature itself. Experts remain divided on whether the use of stomachs and intestines as pots was primarily utilitarian or whether it carried spiritual weight. Some argue that cooking within the animal itself symbolized gratitude, returning its body to service even after death. Others believe it was simply practical, a clever solution in the absence of clay. Watching the careful way the vessels are handled, you suspect both views are valid. The preparation begins with glowing stones pulled from the fire. One by one they are dropped into the stomach filled with water, meat, and herbs. The hiss is sharp, steam rising as the vessel swells. Hands move quickly, stirring with wooden sticks, removing cooled stones and replacing them with fresh ones. Soon the mixture bubbles, rich aromas seeping into the night. The smell is unlike anything before, thick, meaty, earthy, touched with the faint tang of herbs. You can almost feel the steam against your face, warm and comforting, carrying the promise of nourishment. The hunters sit close, eyes fixed on the vessel, their hunger sharpened by long days on the plains. A quirky detail recorded by travelers is that sometimes a buffalo's stomach was placed directly on embers, the outer lining thick enough to resist quick burning. The soup within simmered steadily until ready, while the outside toughened into a leathery shell. Imagine lifting such a vessel from the fire, its surface blackened, only to split it open and release a fragrant broth within. Children watch the process with fascination, knowing that this is not only food but lesson. They learn which stones to heat, how to keep the vessel from bursting, how to stir without tearing the fragile lining. Every detail matters, for one mistake could mean losing a precious meal. Patience and precision are part of the inheritance passed from parent to child. When the stew is ready, bowls are filled with a ladle carved from antler. The broth is rich, almost greasy, filling the mouth with warmth. Meat falls apart between the teeth. Herbs add brightness, and the faint flavor of the stomach itself lingers, earthy and strange, but not unpleasant. It is food born from necessity, but it carries the weight of gratitude. Anthropologists point out that such methods reveal a worldview where nothing of the animal was discarded. Meat gave strength, hides became clothing, bones tools, sinew thread, and the stomach itself a pot. Waste was not an option. To live meant to use wisely, and to use wisely meant to honor the gift fully. You sit back, your belly full from this imagined stew, and reflect on how different this is from your own world of disposable packaging and single-use plastics. Here, the stomach of a buffalo is not refuse but resource. It feeds, teaches, and sustains, embodying a philosophy of respect too easily forgotten today. As the fire burns low, the used vessel is carried away, perhaps given to dogs, perhaps returned to the earth. Tomorrow, another hunt may bring another, but tonight the community rests in fullness. The stars shine brighter, the air grows colder, but bellies are warm. And you realize that survival here was never about luxury. It was about creativity, patience, and reverence for life itself. Snowflakes drift silently through the night, catching in the hair and lashes of children running between lodges. The cold air is sharp, but inside the shelters you find baskets and bark containers filled with small, shriveled jewels, berries dried in the warmth of the summer Sunday. Blueberries, choke cherries, cranberries and strawberries, each once bright and juicy, now preserved into chewy nuggets of sweetness. You lean close to one basket and catch their faint perfume, a ghost of summer lingering in the heart of winter. Archaeologists often find caches of dried berries in storage pits and woven containers, proof that fruit was not just a fleeting pleasure of warm months but a planned reserve for lean seasons. It's well established that native communities mastered drying techniques long before refrigeration, spreading berries on hides or racks to shrink under the sun and wind. Once dry, they could last for months, even a year, providing vitamins and sugar when fresh food was scarce. A charming detail emerges from oral histories. Children were sometimes allowed to eat berries straight from the drying racks, their lips stained purple or red, their giggles carrying through the air. The elders didn't scold them because even as some fruit was lost, it taught the young ones patience and the joy of harvest. You can almost hear their laughter echoing now, mingling with the crackle of a winter fire. Scholars remain divided on whether dried berries were primarily valued as snacks, as trade goods, or as essential winter nutrition. Some point to the way they appear in ceremonial feasts, suggesting symbolic importance, while others emphasize their role in preventing scurvy and illness. The truth may lie in the overlap. Health, joy, and ritual wrapped together in each handful of shriveled fruit. The process itself was deceptively simple. Fresh berries were spread thin in the sun, turned often, and sometimes smoked gently over low fires to speed drying or keep insects away. Once shriveled, they were packed into birch bark boxes or hide pouches, layered with leaves to keep them from sticking together. The work was careful, deliberate, requiring attention to weather and timing. Too much moisture left and the fruit spoiled. Too much heat, and it burned. You might be intrigued to learn that berries were often mixed with other foods. Crushed choke cherries, seeds and all, were blended into dried meat and fat to make pemmican, turning a protein-heavy food into something balanced and even tasty. Strawberries, when rehydrated, might be added to stews for a tart edge, while cranberries provided a bright, sour contrast to fatty dishes. In this way, berries were not only sweets, but subtle seasonings. The taste of dried fruit is vivid in your imagination: tart cranberries that make your mouth pucker, sweet blueberries chewy like candy, choke cherries sharp and almost bitter. Each flavor is intense, concentrated by the drying process. In winter, when most meals are heavy with meat and fat, a single berry can feel like sunlight on the tongue, a reminder of green fields and warm breezes. Some anthropologists argue that berry preservation was as much about cultural rhythm as nutrition. The act of gathering, drying, and storing fruit marked the passage of seasons, tying families to cycles of abundance and scarcity. Others counter that it was purely practical. But as you watch families pass baskets of berries around the fire, you sense the truth. It was both ritual and necessity, celebration and survival. Elders hand-dried berries to children before bed, letting them chew slowly as a treat. Hunters tuck pouches of them into their belts before long journeys, savoring the burst of sweetness on the trail. Women sprinkle them into morning porridge, enlivening the monotony of maize with color and flavor. Every use is simple, yet each one connects back to summer, to sunlight captured and carried into the heart of winter. A little-known practice was to soak dried berries in hot water overnight, creating a sweet infusion like a primitive tea. The liquid, faintly colored and fragrant, warmed the body and soothed the spirit. Imagine sipping it as snow howls outside, the memory of berry bushes in bloom flickering on your tongue. By the end of the night, baskets are lighter, bellies are fuller, and the sweet tang of fruit lingers in the air. The fire dies low, and children curl under furs with sticky fingers and stained lips. Outside, the snow falls thicker, blanketing the earth. Yet inside, warmth spreads not just from fire, but from the taste of summer held safe in winter's teeth. And as you drift with them towards sleep, you realize that dried berries were more than food. They were hope preserved, proof that seasons change, and that summer will always return. The camp is stirring with unusual energy tonight. Fires burn brighter, logs stacked higher, and people gather in greater numbers. You sense that this is no ordinary supper but something sacred, an occasion where food and spirit meet. The smell of roasting meat mingles with the sharp fragrance of herbs, and you realize you are about to witness a ceremonial feast where cooking is inseparable from ritual. Archaeologists and ethnographers note that such feasts often accompanied seasonal transitions, harvest festivals, the first hunt of the year, or the return of migrating animals. It is widely recognized that these meals were never just about filling stomachs. They were about honoring cycles, giving thanks, and reinforcing bonds between humans, animals, and the land. A single meal could be prayer, history, and celebration all at once. One intriguing practice involved offering the very first bite to the fire. Meat or grain was dropped onto the flames, its smoke rising skyward as a gift to unseen powers. The belief was simple yet profound. Before humans ate, spirits must be fed. Imagine the crackle of fat dripping into fire, the hiss carrying prayers upward with each wisp of smoke. Scholars remain divided on whether ceremonial foods differed significantly from daily fare, or whether meaning came from the context of eating rather than the ingredients. Some evidence suggests that rarer foods like certain berries, or the choicest cuts of meat, were saved for ritual. Others argue that it was the act of gathering, singing, and blessing that transformed ordinary stews into sacred fare. Watching now, you sense it was the combination, both the food and the intention behind it. The preparations are elaborate. A massive pit has been dug, lined with hot stones, filled with bundles of venison, maize, and squash wrapped in leaves. Around it, clay pots simmer with soups thickened by beans and flavored with wild herbs. Women stir slowly, humming rhythmic songs that blend with the crackle of fire. Men chant low prayers, calling on ancestors and animal spirits. Children dart around, wide-eyed, their laughter softened by the solemnity of the occasion. You might be fascinated to know that certain tribes painted their faces or decorated cooking vessels with symbols before feasting, spirals for the cycles of the seasons, animal figures for strength, handprints for connection. These markings disappeared with the flames, but their meaning lingered, woven into the atmosphere of the night. The smell is overwhelming: smoke, meat, sweet squash, herbs. It rises thick and heavy, blanketing the camp. Hunger sharpens, but no one eats yet. The food is circled, blessed, and sometimes danced around, each step reinforcing that eating is a communal act, not solitary indulgence. The feast belongs to everyone, even those who cannot attend ancestors, spirits, the unborn. When the pit is finally opened, steam bursts forth like breath from the earth itself. The bundles are lifted out, their leaves charred but fragrant, the meat inside falling apart with tenderness. The pots are ladled into bowls, portions distributed carefully. Only when the elders signal do people begin to eat, and when they do, silence falls first, a silence of respect, of gratitude. The first bites are chewed slowly, deliberately, as though tasting more than food. A lesser-known detail is that some of these ceremonies involved storytelling woven directly into the meal. Elders recounted myths of how corn was given, how the animals sacrificed themselves, how the world was shaped by hunger and generosity. The words were seasoning as vital as salt or herbs, infusing every mouthful with memory. Imagine listening to a creation story while chewing on roasted maize, the tale and the taste blending into one experience. Debates among anthropologists continue about whether such rituals were primarily religious or primarily social. Some see them as spiritual obligations, others as strategies for reinforcing social bonds and distributing resources fairly. To you, sitting cross-legged with a bowl of steaming stew, the distinction hardly matters. You feel both the sacred weight of the moment and the joy of sharing food with everyone around you. The meal stretches long into the night. Drums join the crackle of fire, feet stamp in rhythm, and songs rise under the stars. Children doze against parents' shoulders, mouths still stained with berries or grease. The fire burns lower, embers glowing red, yet the voices remain strong, weaving stories into the darkness. By the end, bones and husks are gathered and burned, or carefully buried to honor the animals and plants that gave themselves. Nothing is discarded carelessly. Even scraps return to the cycle, feeding earth and fire. You lean back, your belly full and your ears ringing with song. The taste of stew lingers on your tongue, but more than that, the memory of the night fills you. A ceremonial feast has fed you in more ways than one: body, spirit, and community bound together in the glow of firelight. And as you close your eyes, you understand that for these people, cooking was never just survival. It was dialogue with the sacred, a way of saying, "We are here, we remember, we are grateful." The days grow longer now, and with them come travelers bearing goods from faraway lands. You notice the excitement ripple through camp as baskets and pouches are opened to reveal treasures not grown here: bright red peppers, coarse chunks of salt, even strange seeds with scents you don't recognize. Trade has arrived, and with it, the flavor of distant places. Historians widely agree that native trade networks stretched astonishing distances, linking coastal tribes with inland farmers, northern hunters with southern growers. Archaeological finds of shells in desert sites, obsidian in prairies, and salt far from the sea confirm that these webs of exchange carried more than tools and ornaments, they carried tastes. And taste, you realize, has always been a form of wealth. One curious detail is how peppers, once introduced, spread quickly into stews and broths. Their fiery kick transformed otherwise familiar meals, giving warmth not just against winter's chill but on the tongue itself. You can almost feel it now, a slow burn creeping across your lips, turning plain maize mush into something electrifying. Some researchers suggest that the introduction of trade spices altered not only diet but also identity. To cook with peppers or salt was to join a larger world, to taste the distant lands they came from. Others argue that these new ingredients were simply folded quietly into existing traditions, valued but not transformative. The debate continues, yet in the rising steam of the stew pot before you, you smell both continuity and change. The scene is vivid, clay pots bubbling with maize and beans, now brightened with pinches of salt. Venison roasts on skewers, rubbed with wild herbs, but also dusted with ground peppers. Children's eyes widen at the fiery taste, some laughing, others reaching for water, learning firsthand that flavor can sting as well as soothe. Elders nod approvingly, recognizing that these foreign touches add depth to familiar meals. A lesser-known practice was to preserve salt in damp cakes, mixing it with ash or clay to transport safely without it crumbling. When needed, the cakes were scraped, and the granules sprinkled into stews. Imagine the relief of tasting salted broth after months of plain fare. It must have felt almost decadent, a reminder of wealth and connection. The trade goods were not constant. Sometimes years passed without peppers. Sometimes salt ran out. Sometimes new seeds arrived. Each ingredient carried with it a story of who had traveled, who had traded, what alliances had been forged. To taste a pepper was to taste diplomacy. To chew on salt was to chew on kinship between far-flung peoples. Anthropologists still debate whether culinary changes from trade weakened local traditions or enriched them. Some caution that reliance on external goods may have created vulnerabilities. Others celebrate the creativity sparked by new flavors. Sitting here, spoon in hand, you see no conflict, only a stew that is richer, sharper, more layered than before, a living proof that culture is not static but porous, always willing to borrow what makes life better. Imagine now the first sip of pepper-spiced broth. The heat hits your tongue, warming your chest even before the fire does. Salt sharpens the sweetness of squash, balancing the richness of venison. The taste is unfamiliar, yet comforting, foreign yet already folded into the rhythm of the meal. You wipe your lips with the back of your hand and smile at the paradox. Newness that feels old, difference that feels like home. Trade spices also carried prestige. To serve them at a feast was to demonstrate connection, influence, even power. They signaled that your community's ties reached far and wide, that you were part of a network larger than the horizon. Every pinch of salt or pepper in the pot was not only flavor, but proof of belonging. When the pots are emptied and the guests depart, you sit quietly with the aftertaste still lingering. The peppers sting your tongue, the salt lingers on your lips, and you realize you have eaten not just food but geography, politics, and history all at once. A meal, here, is never just a meal. As the fire burns low, the traders pack their goods again, moving on to the next village. The people here wave, their bellies warm, their tongues alive with spice. And you understand that in this world without markets or supermarkets, food still traveled, still connected lives. The kitchen was not bounded by the forest or the river. It stretched across the continent, carried in pouches, shared in stories, dissolved in stew. And in that realization, you taste the truth. Every spice, every grain of salt, is more than flavor. It is a thread in the web of human connection, binding camps to camps, rivers to mountains, strangers to kin. The sun sinks behind the hills, casting long shadows over the camp, and tonight you notice smoke rising not from one fire but from many. Families are scattered across the clearing, each tending their own smaller flames. Some are roasting meat on skewers, others boiling maize porridge in clay pots, still others baking bread under mounds of ash. It strikes you that while great feasts and ceremonial pits draw attention, most cooking happened in these small, daily fires, intimate spaces where families shared ordinary meals. Archaeologists examining hearth remains in ancient dwellings often find clusters of small fire pits, not just one large communal blaze. It's widely recognized that each family maintained its own cooking rhythm, its own pot simmering, its own share of fuel gathered. These modest hearths were the real kitchens of daily life, sustaining the slow rhythm of survival more than the rare grandeur of feasts. One delightful detail is how these family fires doubled as storytelling spaces. Parents taught children not only how to tend flames or stir porridge, but also how the stars came to shine, how the animals once spoke, how maize first grew from the earth. Imagine eating hot stew while listening to a creation myth, the warmth of food blending with the warmth of story. Scholars still debate whether these hearth-centered meals were entirely private, or whether they constantly spilled into shared space. Some evidence suggests families often invited neighbors to taste their cooking, blurring the lines between mine and yours. Others argue that while cooperation was common, daily meals retained a strong sense of family identity. Watching now, with laughter and conversation drifting between fires, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, each hearth unique, yet all flames feeding one larger community. The food itself is simple but satisfying. A clay pot simmers with maize gruel, its surface bubbling quietly, while strips of smoked fish are warmed over embers. The smell is subtle, earthy and briny, with faint sweetness from a handful of dried berries sprinkled into the porridge. Children dip carved wooden spoons, blowing on the steaming mixture before taking quick, eager bites. Their faces flush with warmth, lips stained purple from the berries. A quirky tidbit passed down in oral tradition is that some families kept small pets, dogs, even raccoons that sat close by the fire and were occasionally slipped scraps of food. These creatures became part of the mealtime rhythm, their presence tolerated or even cherished. Imagine the soft sound of a dog gnawing on a bone beside you, part of the family, part of the kitchen. The fires burn differently too. Some use cedar for a sharp, cleansing smoke. Others prefer cottonwood, which burns steady and mild. Each choice changes the flavor of the food slightly, giving every family's cooking its own signature taste. Without realizing it, people became masters of flavor simply by mastering their wood piles. Debates among historians linger about whether such family hearths created social distinctions. Did wealthier families hoard more food, or were resources always shared widely? Some evidence points to differences in storage capacity, while oral traditions emphasize generosity as a virtue. Watching here, bowls passed easily between fires. It seems that even when inequality existed, hospitality softened its edges. As you eat your imagined portion, you notice the intimacy of the moment. There is no grand feast, no ceremony, no spectacle, just a family clustered around fire, bowls in hand, steam curling upward into the night, and yet it feels profound. Survival is not only about extraordinary events, but also about repetition, about the quiet assurance of knowing tomorrow another fire will be lit, another pot will simmer. The voices around you soften as the meal winds down. Children yawn, mothers scrape bowls clean, fathers poke at embers to keep the fire alive through the night. Small sparks leap skyward, joining the stars, while the smell of smoke clings to hair and clothing. The day closes not with drama, but with warmth. And you realize something important. While the history books celebrate battles, ceremonies, and councils, real life was sustained here by these small fires, these ordinary meals, these humble acts of cooking. To understand how Native Americans cooked without modern kitchens is to understand not only their tools and techniques, but also their rhythm of life. Steady, patient, rooted in family and flame. As the last bowls are set aside and the children drift to sleep, the hearths glow quietly, keeping watch. And you, drowsy from stew and smoke, find yourself lulled by the same quiet rhythm, the heartbeat of countless small fires that carried generations safely through the night. The morning air is crisp, filled with the earthy scent of damp soil, and you hear the shuffle of feet heading toward the fields. Today, the work isn't about hunting or gathering, it's about farming. Long rows of maize stand tall, their stalks rustling softly, while squash vines sprawl low across the ground and bean plants wind their way upward. Together, they form the ancient agricultural trio known as the Three Sisters. You've seen them on the table in stews before, but now you witness their life in the field, where cooking begins long before the fire. Archaeological evidence from across the Americas confirms the sophistication of these planting systems. It is widely acknowledged that intercropping, the planting of corn, beans, and squash together, wasn't random but carefully engineered. Corn gave beans a natural trellis, beans restored nitrogen to the soil, and squash shaded out weeds with its broad leaves. This was no primitive trial and error, but an ecological symphony, ensuring reliable harvests season after season. You might be fascinated to know that certain communities added a fourth sister, at times sunflowers. Their tall stalks lured birds away from corn, while their seeds provided valuable oil and protein. Imagine the bright yellow heads swaying over the green fields, a splash of color that was both beautiful and practical. Researchers still discuss whether the Three Sisters system spread from a single origin point or developed independently in different regions. Some argue it radiated outward from central Mexico. Others believe local adaptations emerged simultaneously across many landscapes. The debate continues, but here, standing in the morning mist, you see less a question of origin and more a testament to human ingenuity. The harvest itself is communal. Families band together, pulling ripe squash from the soil, snapping ears of corn, plucking beans from climbing vines. The air fills with chatter and laughter, the rhythm of voices as steady as the rustle of leaves. Children chase each other between rows, occasionally drafted into carrying baskets that seem too large for their arms. Every hand matters, every kernel counts. The crops are carried back to camp in woven baskets, their colors vibrant golden corn, green beans, orange squash. The sight alone feels like abundance, a rainbow of nourishment laid at the feet of the people. You catch the sweet, grassy smell of fresh corn silk, the earthy weight of squash, the crisp snap of beans breaking in half. These scents, these textures, are the beginning of countless meals. One quirky tidbit: freshly harvested corn was sometimes roasted directly in its husk over open flames, the leaves blackening while the kernels steamed inside. Children peeled them back, fingers burnt but delighted, biting into sweet, smoky corn that needed no seasoning. You can almost taste the crunch, hear the laughter echo across the field. The beans and squash, too, had their immediate uses. Tender beans were boiled into soups, squash was sliced thin and roasted until golden. Yet much of the harvest was destined for storage. Corn was dried on racks, beans strung on cords, squash sliced into rings and hung to harden in the sunday. These preserved foods became the backbone of winter survival, proof that farming was as much about tomorrow as today. Anthropologists note that the act of farming reshaped social rhythms. Hunting required mobility, but fields anchored communities, creating permanent or semi-permanent villages. Cooking changed with it. Instead of relying solely on what the day's hunt offered, people could plan meals around harvest cycles, building dietary consistency. Yet scholars still question whether agriculture improved life or introduced new hardships: less mobility, more labor, greater risk if crops failed. Both views hold weight, and the steaming pots of maize gruel back at camp remind you of the fragile balance between plenty and scarcity. Tonight, the freshly gathered crops are cooked in a large clay pot. Corn kernels burst in the heat, beans soften, squash melts into creamy sweetness. The broth thickens into a stew fragrant with herbs. It's hearty, filling, and deeply comforting. The first spoonful fills your mouth with sweetness, earthiness, and smoke, flavors bound together as naturally as the plants themselves grew. You realize that the Three Sisters are not just crops, they are harmony served in a bowl. The field, the harvest, the cooking all merge into one cycle. Each bite of stew contains the sun, the rain, the soil, and the hands that tended them. Eating becomes an act of remembering, of honoring the wisdom that designed such balance. As night falls, baskets of corn husks and squash rinds are gathered, some fed to animals, others burned to return to the soil. Nothing is wasted. The fields rest quietly beyond the firelight, waiting for another season. And you, warmed by the stew and soothed by the rhythm of harvest, understand that farming was more than work. It was the heartbeat of community, the steady pulse that made cooking without modern kitchens not just possible, but plentiful. The sky is grey with the promise of rain, and families hurry to their storehouses to check the bounty preserved from earlier months. You follow them to structures of bark, woven reeds, and carefully layered earth. Some are raised on stilts to keep out rodents, others are dug deep into the soil, covered with logs and sod. These are not houses for people, but homes for food granaries, caches, and pits that hold the lifeblood of the community. Without these hidden pantries, all the cooking you've witnessed would have been fleeting, gone with the season. Archaeological digs often uncover such storage pits, lined with bark, clay, or woven mats. The remains of charred maize kernels, squash seeds, and bean pods testify that these places were filled with provisions meant to carry families through the hardest months. It is widely acknowledged that mastery of storage was as important as mastery of hunting or farming. What good was a great harvest if it spoiled before winter's end? One fascinating detail is how some storage pits were sealed with layers of ash. The ash deterred insects and rodents while absorbing excess moisture. The practice shows a kind of science born of observation and understanding of how elements interacted, refined through generations. Imagine scooping away the ash in January, finding the maize beneath still dry and edible, a hidden treasure preserved by foresight. Scholars continue to discuss whether these storage systems represented shared communal wealth or private family reserves. Some pits were large enough to feed dozens, suggesting collective ownership, while others were small, perhaps maintained by single households. The debate lingers, but what you see here is evidence that both models could exist side by side, balancing individuality with cooperation. The storage houses are opened with care. Inside, baskets brim with dried beans, strings of squash slices hang like necklaces, and gourds full of seeds clink softly when moved. The smell is faintly sweet, earthy, mixed with the musk of aged bark. To you it feels like stepping into a bank, but the currency here is calories, measured not in coins, but in kernels. A quirky tidbit from oral traditions is that children were sometimes told stories of mischievous spirits that lived in the caches, stealing food if proper rituals weren't observed. These tales, half warning and half entertainment, taught respect for storage and discipline in how food was used. You can almost hear a grandmother whispering the tale beside the fire, children's eyes wide as they promise not to sneak extra handfuls of maize. From these stores, tonight's meal is chosen: dried beans, kernels of maize, and a gourd of seeds. The beans are soaked, the maize cracked, the seeds toasted over a small fire. Soon a stew begins to form, rich and hearty despite its humble origins. It tastes of patience, of foresight, of the invisible labor done months ago. Each spoonful is a reward for discipline and preparation. Anthropologists note that storage not only secured food, but also shaped power. Those who managed larger caches could feed others, gaining influence and prestige. Some even argue that storage laid the foundation for more complex social hierarchies. Others counter that generosity was the real currency, that those who shared most were those most respected. Watching bowls passed freely from one family to another, you sense truth in both ideas. Food could both divide and unite, depending on how it was handled. You take your imagined bowl and taste the beans, soft yet chewy, the maize hearty, the toasted seeds nutty. It is not fancy fare, but it steadies you, fills you, warms you. You realize this is food designed not for indulgence but for survival, measured, portioned, carefully stewarded across the hungry months. By the fire, families discuss what remains in storage, calculating how many weeks are left before the next harvest. It is a quiet form of accounting. No ledgers or numbers, just memory and experience guiding decisions. Every kernel eaten is weighed against tomorrow's need. And yet, despite the caution, Laughter still bubbles, stories are still told, and food is still shared. Survival does not erase joy, it deepens it. As night falls, the storage houses are sealed again. Lids pressed down, clay smeared, ash scattered. The people return to their homes, bowls licked clean, bellies steady. The caches sit silently in the dark, guardians of tomorrow's meals, unseen but essential. And you realize something profound. Native kitchens extended far beyond the fire or pot. They stretched into the fields, the forests, and beneath the ground. They were invisible but everywhere, rooted in the principle that survival required not just ingenuity in cooking but discipline in saving. The rain finally falls, tapping against roofs and soaking the earth. But inside, families sleep soundly, knowing that beneath the soil, baskets of maize and beans wait patiently. The fire may flicker, the wind may howl, but the pantry of the earth stands firm. The rain has cleared, leaving the air fresh and cool, and you hear the rustle of reeds near the riverbank. A group of women wade into the shallows, carrying woven baskets on their backs. They bend low, tugging at the muddy water, pulling free, long, starchy roots, cattails, arrowheads, water lilies. Their laughter mixes with the splash of water, and you realize you're about to see how wetlands became kitchens. Archaeological digs in river valleys and lake shores often reveal charred tubers and seeds, proof that aquatic plants were staples of native diets. It is widely acknowledged that these wetlands served as gardens without fences, their bounty renewing each season without need for ploughing or planting. Cattail roots, for instance, could be roasted or ground into flour, while their pollen was collected as a golden dust to enrich breads and porridge. A curious and lesser-known detail is that cattail shoots were sometimes eaten fresh, peeled like celery, their flavor crisp and mild. Children nibbled them raw in springtime, a treat that signaled the turning of the seasons. You can almost hear the crunch now, watery and refreshing, a small joy pulled straight from the marsh. Scholars still argue whether wetland plants were central to diets or supplements to farming and hunting. Some evidence points to their abundance being a life-saving fallback during lean times. Others argue they were delicacies, enjoyed for variety rather than necessity. The truth likely shifts with season and circumstance. In famine, they were lifelines. In plenty, they were flavor and texture. The roots gathered today are rinsed in the river, their muddy skins peeled away. Some are sliced and dropped into a clay pot to boil with beans. Others are roasted in ash, their insides turning soft and sweet. A few are pounded into a paste to be dried for later, their starch saved for future meals. The versatility is striking. You see not just food, but flour, thickener, vegetable, and snack all in one plant. The smell rising from the fire is earthy, slightly nutty, unlike meat or grain but equally filling. When you taste it in your imagination, the flavor is subtle, mild but grounding, like eating the essence of soil itself. Mixed with beans and maize, it creates a dish that is hearty yet balanced, carrying the nourishment of land and water together. A quirky tidbit, cattail fluff, usually used for bedding or insulation, was occasionally sprinkled onto sticky dough to keep it from adhering to hands and stones. Imagine biting into bread dusted with soft down, the fluff disappearing on your tongue like a strange, feathery seasoning. It seems almost whimsical, yet practical too. The wetlands provide more than roots. Seeds of wild rice, pads of water lilies, even frogs and turtles supplement the basket. All are carried back to camp, reminders that rivers and marshes fed not only thirst but hunger. In some villages, elders said that the water itself was a grandmother, endlessly giving, endlessly forgiving. Eating from it was an act of respect as much as survival. Anthropologists continue to discuss whether reliance on wetlands signaled adaptability or desperation. Was it a deliberate culinary choice, or was it simply necessity in times of scarcity? Standing here, chewing roasted cattail, you suspect it was both. Choice and need often walk hand in hand, blurring lines in the story of human endurance. As the night settles, bowls of marsh root stew are passed around. Children wrinkle their noses at first, then chew happily once the warmth spreads through them. Elders nod, remembering seasons when cattails alone filled bellies. The meal is simple, humble, but rich with memory. You lean back by the fire, the marsh smell still in your nose, the taste of roots lingering faintly, and you realize that kitchens here were not bounded by stone walls or thatched roofs. They extended into the mud, the water, the reeds. They required no ovens or markets, only hands, baskets, patience, and the wisdom to see food where others might see weeds. As the fire dies down, the river hums softly, frogs croak in chorus, and the baskets sit empty, waiting for tomorrow's harvest. And you, warm from the stew, understand that even the most overlooked plants carried the power to sustain life, proving once again that survival was a matter of attention as much as effort. The sky tonight is wide and full of stars, the fire snapping low as if reluctant to die. You sit among the people one last time, watching as they prepare a final meal that feels less about hunger and more about memory. From baskets come handfuls of dried beans, strings of squash, pouches of berries, cakes of fat, even strips of meat saved from earlier hunts. Every ingredient gathered over seasons, every method you've seen roasting, drying, grinding, boiling now converges into one great pot. It is as though the entire story of their cooking is being retold in the language of food. Archaeologists sometimes describe combination stews found in charred pot residues, mixtures of grains, vegetables, and proteins that defy single classification. It's widely accepted that such stews were common, a practical way to use what was available and avoid waste. But here, in this moment, you sense it is more than practical, it is symbolic, a reminder that survival was never the work of one method alone but of many, woven together like threads in a basket. A quirky yet beautiful practice emerges. Before the stew is served, a portion is set aside for those who have passed on. A bowl is placed near the fire, steam rising into the night. The gesture is not morbid but tender, a recognition that ancestors too deserve to share in the nourishment. You watch the steam rise, curling upward toward the stars, and imagine unseen guests partaking quietly. Historians still discuss whether such rituals of offering were universal or varied greatly by region. Some argue that every meal contained a spiritual dimension, while others believe ritual was reserved for special occasions. The evidence is mixed, but here you sense a truth that scholarship can only circle. Food always carried meaning, whether spoken aloud or silently felt. The stew bubbles slowly, a rich, thick mixture of all things familiar. The smell is overwhelming: smoky meat, nutty maize, earthy beans, sweet squash, tart berries, even the faint caramel note of rendered fat. It is not refined cuisine, it is life condensed into a bowl. You imagine lifting a spoonful to your lips, the flavors colliding and blending at once, every bite telling a story of river, forest, field, and fire. Around you, the community settles into quiet. There is no laughter now, no shouting, only the gentle sound of spoons tapping bowls, of satisfied sighs, of fire crackling. You look at their faces and see something deeper than contentment: resilience. Each person here has eaten through seasons of plenty and of hunger, through storms and droughts, through lean winters and abundant harvests. Every meal is testimony to their endurance. An overlooked but remarkable detail is how leftovers are treated. Nothing is thrown away. What cannot be eaten tonight is dried again, stored, or shared with animals. Even ashes from the fire are scattered on fields to enrich the soil. Waste is absent, because in a world without modern abundance, everything holds value. You sense the humility in this, the understanding that food is not endless but borrowed. The debate among anthropologists about how much of this cooking was innovation versus necessity seems almost irrelevant as you sit here. Innovation and necessity are not rivals. They are companions. Every trick of preservation, every clever use of bone or bark, every ritual offering grew from the same root, the desire to live well with what the land allowed. The fire burns low, the last bowls are emptied, and the people begin to drift toward their shelters. Children curl against their mothers, bellies full, eyes heavy. Elders sit a little longer, gazing at the flames as if reading the future in the embers. You stay among them, warmed by stew and smoke, listening to the steady breath of a people who survived not through kitchens of steel and glass, but through patience, creativity, and respect. And in that quiet, you realize you've been given more than recipes or methods. You've been shown a worldview, that cooking is not separate from hunting or gathering, from ritual or story, from survival or joy. It is all one, woven like the three sisters in a single field, like fire and smoke bound together in a single flame. The last ember snaps, and night deepens. You lean back, full not of food but of understanding. The native way of cooking without modern kitchens was never primitive. It was sophisticated, balanced, sustainable, and profoundly human. Now, as the final pot is emptied and the camp settles into silence, let the story soften. The fire shrinks to glowing coals, and the air cools against your cheeks. You picture the people lying down beneath hides and furs, their stomachs full, their spirits eased. Outside, the fields sleep, the rivers murmur, the forests breathe quietly. Nothing more is asked tonight. Nothing more is needed. Let your own breathing slow as theirs does. Imagine the rhythm of their lives, the grind of maize, the crack of firewood, the bubbling of stew slipping into the background, fading into memory. You can almost hear the steady heartbeat of the earth beneath you, calm and reassuring. Every sound of cooking, every scent of food, every taste of survival now blends into a single hum of continuity. There is comfort in knowing that these practices endured for centuries, carried by countless hands, passed down through generations. And though the tools may seem different from your world, stone, bone, bark, clay, the intentions are familiar. To feed, to care, to preserve, to share. These are not ancient impulses. They are timeless. Let your mind grow light, drifting like steam rising from a cooling pot. Let your body sink, as though wrapped in warm furs by a fading fire. The people you've imagined fade gently into the night, their laughter and voices soft as wind in the trees. Only calm remains, and with it, rest. Close your eyes, let the embers dim, and carry with you the warmth of their kitchens, earth, fire, patience, and love. You are safe, full, and ready for sleep. Sweet dreams.